Jian Wushuang delivered an impassioned speech and spoke with confidence. He spoke with confidence because justice was on his side. There was a drastic change on the ancient battlefield, and Greenfire World had such great value. It was all the work of the Grand Formation. Plus, the Grand Formation did stabilize the space-time storm. If there wasn't the Grand Formation, everything would just be empty talk. However, he didn't share one thing. The Grand Formation wasn't maintained by the energy provided by various resources and treasure. It had merged into one with the space-time storm. Hence, the energy source to maintain the formation was actually with the space-time storm. It was also the brilliant skill of the person who had created this formation, Jian Wushuang's master, Xianxia. Over the years, Greenfire World had been manipulating the formation. In actual fact, they didn't need to spend any resources to manipulate the formation. He had said it required an enormous resource to maintain because he wanted to get more benefits for Greenfire World from the experts before him. Plus, whatever he said, the experts in front of him had to agree. As expected, East Royal Emperor from Sanctuary Alliance, who had studied intensively information, spoke. To maintain such a huge formation, the required resources are beyond one's imagination. Even to Sanctuary Alliance, it wouldn't be easy. Greenfire World would require a decent amount of resources and treasure to maintain the formation. It is pretty reasonable. Although the other experts were unwilling, they had no choice but to agree. Sword Emperor, tell us, how many doctrine gems? Ancestor Tianchen asked. Not many. Any almighty who enters the ancient battlefield once will need to pay 2,000 doctrine gems as payment, Jian Wushuang said. Pay attention. I meant per entry. In other words, regardless of how long you stay, tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years, as long as you don't leave, you only have to pay 2,000 doctrine gems. However, if you only stay on the ancient battlefield for a few hundred years or even a dozen years and you leave in between, you will still have to pay 2,000 doctrine gems when you enter again. I will allocate an expert to collect doctrine gems at the space gap that is connected to the ancient battlefield. The experts at the scene exchanged a look and nodded in silence. Only 2,000 doctrine gems? Any top chaotic real god who was rich could easily pay. To almighties it was nothing, so they could easily accept it. However, it was nothing if there was only one person paying 2,000 doctrine gems. However, the almighties from eternal chaotic world who could wander in this ancient battlefield numbered more than 1,000, and every one of them would pay 2,000 doctrine gem each. It would be a sky-high number if all added up. Plus, if they were to leave in between, they would have to pay doctrine gems again when they re-entered the ancient battlefield. To Greenfire World, it was simply a huge income. Sword Emperor, we agree with your 3 conditions, Ancestor Tianchen said. Don't be in a hurry. I have a 4th condition. Jian Wushuang smiled faintly. More. Ancestor Tianchen creased his eyebrows. Sword Emperor, don't you have too many conditions? Don't worry. The 4th condition has nothing to do with anyone's benefit. It is merely a personal matter. Jian Wushuang spoke, but his gaze turned cold. Greenfire World, was obviously framed. We were nearly exterminated because of this. I naturally have to deal with this. Hence, my 4th condition is to wish for everyone to tell me, who is it that exposed the existence of the ancient battlefield and then pushed Greenfire World to the toughest point? Jian Wushuang's voice was cold, with a tinge of murderous intention. The experts on the spot let out a breath of relief. They thought Jian Wushuang was going to bring up some strict conditions, but he was merely looking for the person who had exposed the secret of the ancient battlefield. It had nothing to do with them, so they naturally didn't mind. I know that person. There was a cold voice. Everyone looked to the source of the voice. The person who spoke was Colored Glaze Great Emperor. Jian Wushuang wasn't surprised at that. Colored Glaze Emperor was the first to reach Greenfire World among all great emperors. Plus, when she reached Greenfire World, she called out his name straight away. She obviously already knew the actual situation in Greenfire World, and someone had definitely told her. The person who spread the news about this ancient battlefield and schemed against Greenfire World is a Sir God in Colored Glaze Sanctuary who has just broken through. Sir God Xue Dao, Colored Glaze Great Emperor said. Sir God Xue Dao? The experts at the scene revealed confused expressions. They obviously had never heard of Sir God Xuedao. Sir God Xuedao is Emperor God Xianxia's junior disciple. Sword Emperor, you should know why he schemed against Green Fire World, right? Colored Glaze Great Emperor said. Jian Wushuang's gaze turned cold and he understood. Emperor God Xianxian was the first person who had discovered the ancient battlefield. But in the end, he had died by Jian Wushuang's hands. Before Emperor God Xianxian died, he had definitely sent a message to Sir God Xuedao, which had led to the following agenda. As Sir God Xuedao is an almighty from Colored Glaze Sanctuary, I wonder if Colored Glaze Great Emperor would stop me if I wanted to kill him, Jian Wushuang asked. No, Colored Glaze Great Emperor answered. Sir God Xuedao is very cunning. I was framed too. That's great. Jian Wushuang nodded. Sword Emperor, you don't have to do anything about Sir God Xuedao personally. Sanctuary Alliance will figure out a way to capture him alive and send him to you. Even if he is killed by accident, we will send his dead body over too. What do you think? Ancestor Tianqin said. Thank you, Ancestor Tianqin. Jian Wushuang thanked him and said, That's all. As everyone agreed with my conditions, let's talk about the territory that Green Fire World will give out. Jian Wushuang immediately started another discussion with the great emperors. During the discussion, it was inevitable to go through haggling. But in the end, they reached a mutual agreement. Green Fire World would give 30% of their territory to the junior disciples from various forces in Eternal Chaotic World. Then they could continue to reproduce there. Green Fire World was huge and 30% of their territory was huge enough to take on a large number of cultivators. Of course, Sanctuary Alliance and Special Tribes initially wanted more territory, but Jian Wushuang was holding a strong position, and it ended up with such an outcome after a fierce negotiation. Then, both parties reached a mutual agreement. Of course, both parties compromised in order to achieve a mutual agreement. However, they had no other alternative but to give way. After all, both parties had scruples. Jian Wushuang represented the entire Green Fire World. Comparing Green Fire World to the entire Eternal Chaotic World, it was at a disadvantage. Green Fire World was too valuable. After Green Fire World was exposed, Jian Wushuang understood that Green Fire World had to give way. He used up all he could to protect the benefits of the cultivators in Green Fire World. Although Green Fire World gave out 30% territory, Green Fire World was finally under his control. They kept the ancient battlefield where the skull was, where the Green Fire World was located. On top of that, experts from various forces had to pay a certain amount of doctrine gems and supplement some resources that Green Fire World needed. That was good enough. As for Sanctuary Alliance and Special Tribe, because they were worried that Jian Wushuang would fight at the risk of mutual destruction, worried about the formation that blended with the spacetime storm, they had no choice but to compromise. Dealing with a spacetime storm that could instantly wipe out the entire ancient battlefield and all experts at the scene, they couldn't be aggressive. After they reached a mutual agreement, experts from various forces left and made their own preparations. One thing for sure was that Sanctuary Alliance, Special Tribes, and various forces in Eternal Chaotic World had to discuss how many cultivators below real god level could head into Green Fire World. Also, they would have to discuss who would make up the Alliance of 10. All those would go through some arguments. Of course, that had nothing to do with Jian Wushuang. In the lofty palace, Jian Wushuang, Emperor Bai, who closed his eyes and never spoke, finally opened his eyes. Mr. Emperor Bai. Jian Wushuang immediately looked at Emperor Bai. I never thought that your hometown would be on this ancient battlefield. If I am not mistaken, Emperor 13 should be formed on this ancient battlefield. Right? Emperor Bai asked. Yes. Jian Wushuang nodded. As expected, Emperor Bai smiled faintly. He then said, I heard that your power has improved tremendously over the years. How far away are you from the 7th step? I am very close, Jian Wushuang answered. I see. Emperor Bai creased his eyebrows and said, Although I know it is about luck to break through, I hope you could break through sooner. After all, Eternal Chaotic World is becoming more and more unstable. The two hidden dark forces continuously popped out one after another. If I'm not mistaken, in no time, the two hidden dark forces will take major action. Jian Wushuang was shocked and he immediately nodded. I understand. Jian Wushuang bid farewell soon after. After Jian Wushuang left the palace, he plunged in the direction of Greenfire World. Before he got close to Greenfire World, Jian Nantian, Wang Yuan, Su Rou and the others who had been waiting for very long in Greenfire World greeted him. Shuang, how did it go? Jian Nantian asked closely. Third brother. The others looked at Jian Wushuang. All their gazes were filled with anticipation. Jian Wushuang smiled faintly. It's okay. A simple reply made all cultivators in Greenfire World be filled with excitement. One should know that all of them viewed death unflinchingly and wanted to fight at a risk of mutual destruction. They had already prepared to die in the battle. But then, they were fine? Everything had been solved? Really? Wang Yuan found it unbelievable. Of course. Jian Wushuang smiled and looked at Jian Nantian. Father, please gather all higher-ups in Greenfire World for a discussion. All right. Jian Nantian nodded and immediately went to make the arrangement. Jian Wushuang brought King Luo Yu and Lord Spirit Sound to a remote void. King Luo Yu, Lord Spirit Sound, thank you so much. Jian Wushuang expressed his gratitude. Lord Spirit Sound shrugged but didn't say much. King Luo Yu said solemnly, Sword Emperor, you are welcome. We of ancient god tribe value bloodlines the most. You have our royal bloodline and you should be our new emperor. I wonder when Sword Emperor will follow me back to ancient god tribe. Ancient god tribe? Jian Wushuang couldn't help but smile. You can tell that I am very busy now. Wait for a while. Until Greenfire World and the ancient battlefield stable down, I will head down to visit ancient god tribe. Alright, this is my communication token. When Sword Emperor reaches ancient god tribe, send me a message directly. King Luo Yu passed Jian Wushuang his token and he left. From the beginning until the end, King Luo Yu had revered Jian Wushuang from the bottom of his heart. After King Luo Yu left, Jian Wushuang looked at Lord Spirit Sound again. Lord Spirit Sound, it has been so long. There are many things that I am confused about. I wonder if you could answer them for me. Sure. Go ahead and ask. Lord Spirit Sound replied with a faint smile. She knew that Jian Wushuang would definitely ask her some questions. She was well prepared. Lord Spirit Sound, you should know what I want to ask, right? Jian Wushuang looked at Lord Spirit Sound. Firstly, it's about where you are from. If I'm not mistaken, Lord Spirit Sound shouldn't be related to lineage of star at all. Previously, you said that you controlled Star Foggy Sea to select disciple for lineage of star. I'm afraid that's not the truth, right? That's right. I am not related to lineage of star at all. As for controlling Star Foggy Sea, someone wanted me to do that, Lord Spirit Sound said. Who? Jian Wushuang asked closely. Xianxia. You should know this, Lord Spirit Sound smiled. Jian Wushuang was surprised when he heard the name Xianxia. As expected, Jian Wushuang sighed. He had already guessed so in his head. As for where I am from, I think you could guess it too. I am from the surrounding battlefield, as are the cultivators from ancient times that you were talking about. However, I was only a small figure in ancient times. I somehow or other got involved in the war back then. Back then, the war darkened the sky and obscured everything. Countless terrifying existences passed away. Although I got involved in the war, I was lucky. At least, I survived, Lord Spirit Sound said. Although I survived, I was in bad shape. I was in a deep sleep in the depths of this ancient battlefield. I had no alternative until I met the mysterious expert named Xianxia. He woke me up and helped me to recover my power. As an exchange, I have to control Star Foggy Sea on his behalf until someone can pass the final test in Star Foggy Sea. Then I will gain my freedom. As for the excuse of manipulating Star Foggy Sea on behalf of the Master of Star Palace, it was instructed by Xianxia. I don't even know what lineage of star is, so why would I control Star Foggy Sea on their behalf? Jian Wushuang had been too tense. He was too stressed. The life and death of Greenfire World had been upon him previously, and he hadn't dared to lower his guard and act recklessly. After all, with the difference of one step, Greenfire World would be doomed forever. Now, Greenfire World was finally safe. The danger had been removed and there would be no trouble. Jian Wushuang finally relaxed. However, the sudden relaxation fully enlightened Jian Wushuang. The bottleneck in his body finally loosened up. He was going to break through. I have something urgent. I have to cultivate in seclusion immediately. Father, Brother Wang Yuan, please take care of the rest of the matter, Jian Wushuang exhorted. No problem. Jian Nantian and Wang Yuan nodded heavily. Jian Yi, assist them with all you can, Jian Wushuang commanded. Yes, master, Jian Yi replied politely. After that, Jian Wushuang immediately returned to his secret room in Wushuang City. In the secret room, Jian Wushuang sat there while billowing divine power swept out madly. A turning point is hard to come to. If I were to miss it, no one would know how long it would take until I got the next chance. Hence, regardless, I have to break through. Jian Wushuang clenched his hand and closed his eyes. He started focusing on getting onto the 7th step in reverse cultivation. Just as Jian Wushuang was breaking through in seclusion, Green Fire World and various forces in Eternal Chaotic World were making arrangements according to their mutual agreement. Firstly, Green Fire World gave out 30% of their territories. When the higher-ups in Green Fire World announced it and started execution, it stirred up a great commotion within Green Fire World. There were countless cultivators who were raging with anger, especially the cultivators who were located within the 30% territories. There was a vast surge of public feeling. Many of them were unwilling and they caused short-term chaos within Green Fire World. However, the chaos gradually settled down as Jian Nantian and Wang Yuan led the 9 major forces to suppress and comfort them. The cultivators who were at the bottom might not have known the ins and outs of the story and thus they couldn't understand. But at least, the cultivators who were more powerful knew how helpless and difficult it was for the higher-ups in Green Fire World. The cultivators who were located within the territories relocated to other region under the allocation of the higher-ups. Within a dozen years, the cultivators within the 30% territory were completely relocated. Besides, the higher-ups from Green Fire World even set up a great formation within the 30% territory. They even told the cultivators from Green Fire World that they were prohibited to step foot in the 30% territory. As for the cultivators in the 30% territory, Green Fire World didn't care if they could exit. After all, besides the 10 Almighties, the cultivators in the 30% territory were all below real God level. Even if they came out, they couldn't dream about making trouble within Green Fire World. Within 100 years, Green Fire World had already completed all necessary arrangements. On the other hand, Sanctuary Alliance, special tribes, and various forces from Eternal Chaotic World went through a dozen discussions and it took almost a decade until they reached a mutual agreement on the number of cultivators that they could send. Then only they started preparation. When Green Fire World was ready, they selected 100 million of cultivators from various forces in Eternal Chaotic World to move to Green Fire World. 100 million. Sounded like it was a huge number. However, compared to the boundless cultivators in the vast Eternal Chaotic World, it was so few. It was just like a drop of water in the ocean. In any ordinary big world in Eternal Chaotic World, the number of cultivators was far greater than this number. However, various forces in Eternal Chaotic World knew that the first batch of cultivators to Green Fire World should have higher quality than quantity. In terms of numbers, 100 million cultivators could definitely increase by 10 or 100 times after reproduction. However, various forces had to ensure the first batch of cultivators that they sent possessed a certain level of talent. In other words, the 100 million cultivators had to be geniuses in their own force or sect. A total of 100 million cultivators. Just as they were transporting the 100 million cultivators into Green Fire World, there was a problem that arose. It was their travel route. Various forces in Eternal Chaotic World had originally intended to send their geniuses to Green Fire World through the space gap in ancient Mysteryland. Very quickly, they realized that it was impossible. After all, the space gap wasn't a wormhole that had stable spacetime. Almighties or real gods who were more powerful could rely on their personal power to shuttle through the space gap forcibly. However, the geniuses weren't even cultivators above real god level. How could they travel through the space gap? The 100 million geniuses, there might be 90% of them who would die in the space gap. Just as all forces in Eternal Chaotic World were deeply distressed about that, Jian Nantian informed them another route to enter Greenfire World on behalf of Greenfire World. They had to enter through Dayu World in Snow Kingdom. When they arrived outside the spacetime storm, they could pass through Greenfire World formation to enter the ancient battlefield. However, according to Jian Nantian, it wouldn't be easy to open the formation. On top of that, they had to transport a total of 100 million cultivators. Hence, as an exchange, various forces in Eternal Chaotic World paid a large amount of Doctrine Gem to Greenfire World again as compensation. As the 100 million cultivators from Eternal Chaotic World resided in the 30% territory and started reproducing, Greenfire World finally settled down. From then on, Greenfire World and the cultivators living in the 30% territory lived their own lives without getting involved. Both parties were utilizing the environment in Greenfire World to grow. On the ancient battlefield, all experts continued to wander and search for opportunities. However, due to the previous agreement, no Almighties dared to enter the territory where the huge skull was located. Whoever barged in without permission and was detected would be exterminated by Sanctuary Alliance, special tribes, and various forces. No one had the guts to go against the rules. The ancient battlefield finally steadied. The time flew past. In the blink of an eye, the agreement between Greenfire World and Eternal Chaotic World had been running for 3,000 years. Jian Wushuang had also been cultivating in seclusion for 3,000 years until then. Hong! There was loud thunder, and Jian Wushuang, who had been cultivating in the secret room, suddenly quivered and his eyes shot open. There was unprecedented joy in his eyes. I spent 3,000 years and I finally leaped over. 7th step of inverse cultivation, chaotic supreme. I did it. Jian Wushuang had been too tense. He was too stressed. The life and death of Greenfire World had been upon him previously, and he hadn't dared to lower his guard and act recklessly. After all, with the difference of one step, Greenfire World would be doomed forever. Now, Greenfire World was finally safe. The danger had been removed, and there would be no trouble. Jian Wushuang finally relaxed. However, the sudden relaxation fully enlightened Jian Wushuang. The bottleneck in his body finally loosened up. He was going to break through. I have something urgent. I have to cultivate in seclusion immediately. Father, Brother Wang Yuan, please take care of the rest of the matter, Jian Wushuang exhorted. No problem. Jian Nantian and Wang Yuan nodded heavily. Jian Yi, assist them with all you can, Jian Wushuang commanded. Yes, master, Jian Yi replied politely. After that, Jian Wushuang immediately returned to his secret room in Wushuang City. In the secret room, Jian Wushuang sat there while billowing divine power swept out madly. A turning point is hard to come to. If I were to miss it, no one would know how long it would take until I got the next chance. Hence, regardless, I have to break through. Jian Wushuang clenched his hand and closed his eyes. He started focusing on getting onto the 7th step in reverse cultivation. Just as Jian Wushuang was breaking through in seclusion, Greenfire World and various forces in Eternal Chaotic World were making arrangements according to their mutual agreement. Firstly, Greenfire World gave out 30% of their territories. When the higher-ups in Greenfire World announced it and started execution, it stirred up a great commotion within Greenfire World. There were countless cultivators who were raging with anger, especially the cultivators who were located within the 30% territories. There was a vast surge of public feeling. Many of them were unwilling, and they caused short-term chaos within Greenfire World. However, the chaos gradually settled down as Jian Nantian and Wang Yuan led the 9 major forces to suppress and comfort them. The cultivators who were at the bottom might not have known the ins and outs of the story, and thus they couldn't understand. But at least, the cultivators who were more powerful knew how helpless and difficult it was for the higher-ups in Greenfire World. The cultivators who were located within the territories relocated to other region under the allocation of the higher-ups. Within a dozen years, the cultivators within the 30% territory were completely relocated. Besides, the higher-ups from Greenfire World even set up a great formation within the 30% territory. They even told the cultivators from Greenfire World that they were prohibited to step foot in the 30% territory. As for the cultivators in the 30% territory, Greenfire World didn't care if they could exit. After all, besides the 10 Almighties, the cultivators in the 30% territory were all below real god level. Even if they came out, they couldn't dream about making trouble within Greenfire World. Within 100 years, Greenfire World had already completed all necessary arrangements. On the other hand, Sanctuary Alliance, special tribes, and various forces from Eternal Chaotic World went through a dozen discussions, and it took almost a decade until they reached a mutual agreement on the number of cultivators that they could send. Then only they started preparation. When Greenfire World was ready, they selected 100 million of cultivators from various forces in Eternal Chaotic World to move to Greenfire World. 100 million. Sounded like it was a huge number. However, compared to the boundless cultivators in the vast Eternal Chaotic World, it was so few. It was just like a drop of water in the ocean. In any ordinary big world in Eternal Chaotic World, the number of cultivators was far greater than this number. However, various forces in Eternal Chaotic World knew that the first batch of cultivators to Greenfire World should have higher quality than quantity. In terms of numbers, 100 million cultivators could definitely increase by 10 or 100 times after reproduction. However, various forces had to ensure the first batch of cultivators that they sent possessed a certain level of talent. In other words, the 100 million cultivators had to be geniuses in their own force or sect. A total of 100 million cultivators. Just as they were transporting the 100 million cultivators into Greenfire World, there was a problem that arose. It was their travel route. Various forces in Eternal Chaotic World had originally intended to send their geniuses to Greenfire World through the space gap in ancient Mysteryland. Very quickly, they realized that it was impossible. After all, the space gap wasn't a wormhole that had stable spacetime. Almighties or real gods who were more powerful could rely on their personal power to shuttle through the space gap forcibly. However, the geniuses weren't even cultivators above real god level. How could they travel through the space gap? The 100 million geniuses, there might be 90% of them who would die in the space gap. Just as all forces in Eternal Chaotic World were deeply distressed about that, Xianxia informed them another route to enter Greenfire World on behalf of Greenfire World. They had to enter through Daiyu World in Snow Kingdom. When they arrived outside the spacetime storm, they could pass through Greenfire World formation to enter the ancient battlefield. However, according to Xianxia, it wouldn't be easy to open the formation. On top of that, they had to transport a total of 100 million cultivators. Hence, as an exchange, various forces in Eternal Chaotic World paid a large amount of Doctrine Gem to Greenfire World again as compensation. As the 100 million cultivators from Eternal Chaotic World resided in the 30% territory and started reproducing, Greenfire World finally settled down. From then on, Greenfire World and the cultivators living in the 30% territory lived their own lives without getting involved. Both parties were utilizing the environment in Greenfire World to grow. On the ancient battlefield, all experts continued to wander and search for opportunities. However, due to the previous agreement, no Almighties dared to enter the territory where the huge skull was located. Whoever barged in without permission and was detected would be exterminated by Sanctuary Alliance, special tribes, and various forces. No one had the guts to go against the rules. The ancient battlefield finally steadied. The time flew past. In the blink of an eye, the agreement between Greenfire World and Eternal Chaotic World had been running for 3,000 years. Jian Wushuang had also been cultivating in seclusion for 3,000 years until then. Hong! There was loud thunder, and Jian Wushuang, who had been cultivating in the secret room, suddenly quivered and his eyes shot open. There was unprecedented joy in his eyes. I spent 3,000 years and I finally leaped over. Seventh step of inverse cultivation, chaotic supreme. I did it. The seventh step of inverse cultivation, almighty level. In ancient times, the level was named as chaotic realm. In inverse cultivation, it was called chaotic supreme. Right at the moment that he broke through and leaped to the step, Jian Wushuang's divine body and divine power was transforming at a shocking speed. Especially his divine body. This feeling? Jian Wushuang was surprised. He realized that his divine body had started collapsing. Yes, collapsing. Without any influence from the outside. He had broken through and his divine body had started collapsing. Of course, such a collapse was necessary to be reborn. Virum. Jian Wushuang's divine body completely collapsed and became a bolt of energy that dispersed in the void. There was only his heart that was floating in the air, and the heart contained boundless light. Jian Wushuang's consciousness and soul were in the heart too. Then, walala. An enormous amount of pure energy swept towards the heart from all directions. Jian Wushuang's divine body gradually recovered again. It first collapsed, then recovered. It was reorganization. Divine body reorganization. From limbs and organs to pores and cells, everything resubstantiated. Jian Wushuang also noticed that the reorganization was completely purely with divine power. Merely divine power had substantiated a divine body. Transformation. From the beginning to the end, he had transformed completely. The moment his new divine body was reorganized, Jian Wushuang could tell that his reorganized divine body was unusual. At the same time, Jian Wushuang was recalling the information about the seventh step inverse cultivation. The seventh step of inverse cultivation, chaotic supreme, completed the perfect chaotic divine body. A perfect chaotic divine body would be immune to poison, water, and fire, and be immortal. The biggest difference between a seventh step of inverse cultivation cultivator and an ordinary cultivator was the perfect chaotic divine body. The perfect chaotic divine body was a constitution, a unique supreme constitution that could make everyone feel visibly moved. The constitution was enough to shock the world. Jian Wushuang knew about the seventh step inverse cultivation, and he also knew about the perfect chaotic divine body. However, he didn't know how impressive the perfect chaotic divine body was. Just then, merely at the beginning of his transformation, he was shocked. In the process of his divine body reorganizing, time continued to fly past. In the blink of an eye, 1 month's time passed. His divine body completely reorganized and transformation ended. He truly became an almighty as an inverse cultivator. In the secret room, Jian Wushuang continued to sit cross-legged. Then both his hands were like lightning. The original 7 ancient tribe star in between his eyebrows became 8. Just as he broke through and reached the 7th step, his ancient tribe bloodline enhanced again in the process when his divine body reorganized. Jian Wushuang didn't bother with the 8th ancient tribe star then, but he focused on his divine body. He looked at his hands as he felt the energy-fueled divine body. His eyes were glistening with joy. This is the perfect chaotic divine body? This is the 7th step of inverse cultivation? Jian Wushuang muttered, and he was excited. He had completed his transformation and he could feel his divine body was special. That was why he was surprised. Let's head out to give it a try. Jian Wushuang suppressed his excitement and appeared in an independent space. Jian Wushuang stood in the boundless dark void quietly while there was another figure in front of him. The person was Jian Yi. 3,000 years passed and Jian Yi's power was only slightly behind his peak status. He would need at least 2,000 years more until he recovered his power to its peak. Jian Yi's fighting power shouldn't be weaker than Abysmal Saint Master when he recovered to his peak. He might even be stronger than Abysmal Saint Master. Jian Yi, give me your all and fight with me. Jian Wushuang clasped his hands together when he said, "Yes." Jian Yi nodded. Then Jian Wushuang and Jian Yi launched an attack simultaneously. Jian Wushuang didn't draw his sword and only punched with his right hand. His fist brought about pure divine power after his transformation on the 7th step of inverse cultivation. Hong! A simple punch formed a terrifying storm and tore up the surrounding dark void at ease. Then, it revealed a space black hole that was a few 100,000 miles wide. Jian Yi didn't go easy on him either. He punched and exploded his divine power of 1 in peak chaotic realm. Both parties didn't use unique skills or secret skills. It was purely a competition of strength. Bang! There was a loud bang and the independent space seemed to have exploded and it trembled in balance. Jian Wushuang's body grew heavy and he took a few steps back. As for Jian Yi, he only took 1 step back. Judging by his look, it was obvious that Jian Yi had the upper hand. Jian Yi, did you exert all your strength? Jian Wushuang asked. Yes. Jian Yi nodded solemnly. Jian Wushuang was surprised when he heard that. Jian Yi was an expert from ancient times. His divine power was extremely pure. Even though he had yet to recover to his peak, his power was stronger than any ordinary great emperor's. But Jian Wushuang's divine power was only slightly weaker when they collided directly. From this result, it could be said that his divine power strength could be comparable to an ordinary great emperor's. I stepped foot on the 7th step and my divine power increased tremendously. Previously, my divine power was at Emperor God level and now I can compare to a great emperor favorably. Jian Wushuang smiled. One should know that it was purely the power of divinity. His strength was not only relying on divine power alone. Jian Yi, let's do it again. You continue to use all your strength but be more careful this time. Jian Wushuang reminded him with a smile. Then, there was billowing divine power concentrating in his right hand. At the same time, his fierce ancient tribe bloodline power had already reached the 8-star level. Come on! Jian Wushuang laughed and took a stride forward. Then, he punched directly without any other moves. Jian Yi also punched like lightning to give full play to his power. Bang! There was another loud bang. However, it was Jian Yi who stumbled and fell backward for quite a distance. Jian Wushuang didn't even take a step back. It was obvious that Jian Wushuang absolutely had the upper hand. As expected, there was excitement glistening in Jian Wushuang's eyes as he looked at his right hand. In terms of divine power explosion, I can compare to an ordinary great emperor favorably. With the addition of ancient tribe bloodline power, my strength might be stronger by a notch than an ordinary emperor god's. Among the 15 great emperors on the Heaven and Earth Supreme ranking list, forget about Emperor Bai for now, my strength might be able to compare favorably with Red Dragon King, who is in 2nd place. Red Dragon King, the 2nd place on Heaven and Earth Supreme ranking list. He was 2nd to Emperor Bai. Red Dragon King was known for his fierce power. The other great emperors besides Emperor Bai were all weaker than him. In terms of strength explosion, Jian Wushuang was stronger than an ordinary great emperor by 1 notch. Although he might not have been able to compare favorably with Red Dragon King, he could at least be his match. Divine power is at this level. Next, let me see my divine body. Jian Wushuang was very excited. His divine body had just been through reorganization. He could feel that his divine body was very strong and peculiar. However, he would need to check to know which level he was at. Jian Yi, hit me with your all, Jian Wushuang said. Attack you? Master, this. Jian Yi creased his eyebrows. When I tell you to, you should just do it. You shouldn't be in doubt. Jian Wushuang smiled and he looked rather confident. Jian Yi didn't hesitate anymore. He moved and appeared before Jian Wushuang. He then punched Jian Wushuang's chest with his right hand. There was a fierce power that formed. Jian Wushuang stood there but didn't move an inch. His divine body wasn't affected at all. Jian Yi, how much strength did you use? Jian Wushuang creased his eyebrows and asked. 50%, Jian Yi answered. He, of course, didn't dare to use his full force when he was attacking his master. Do it again. This time, use full force. On top of that, you can use unique skills, Jian Wushuang commanded. It wasn't because he was arrogant, but he was really confident. At least, the earlier punch was like scratching an itch. He didn't feel it much. Yes. Jian Yi nodded. Jian Yi didn't hold back that time. He used 100% of his strength. There was a cloud churning around his body and boundless crimson cloud permeated his palm. Hong! The crimson palm slammed into Jian Wushuang without hindrance. The billowing power was terrifying. Even a peak emperor god could be easily killed with that slam. Jian Wushuang didn't intend to dodge the palm at all. Bang! The crimson palm slammed Jian Wushuang, and it was 10 times stronger than Jian Yi's earlier punch. Even so, Jian Wushuang only took 1 step back and his expression still looked rather relaxed. This palm could barely move me. It is not enough to hurt me? Jian Wushuang shook his head. How about this? Jian Wushuang had a thought in his mind. The 5-gem armor that he had always been wearing shrunk and appeared on his palm. He then put it away in his Qian Kuan ring. I will not wear any armor. I'll just take the hit with my divine body. Give it a try again. Jian Wushuang smiled. 5-gem armor was a treasure given to him by an ancient tribe expert, Wu Hun. Although it was broken, its defensive power was above any ordinary chaotic divine treasure. For instance, 5-gem armor could cut down Jian Yi's attack by 90%. Jian Yi naturally couldn't hurt him. Hence, he wouldn't be able to examine his current divine power's strength. So, he decided to take off his 5-gem armor directly. Master, are you sure about this? Jian Yi hesitated. Don't talk rubbish. Just do it. Jian Wushuang smiled. Jian Yi let out a sigh and he attacked again without hesitation. He used the same move, the same crimson palm that contained terrifyingly strong power. Again, Jian Wushuang didn't block the attack at all. The crimson palm hit Jian Wushuang's divine body again. Hong! The terrifying power impacted Jian Wushuang's divine body. The power strangled everything madly and it tore a big hole in Jian Wushuang's chest. There were some organs that shattered into pieces too. Master, this... Jian Yi looked distressed. However, Jian Wushuang, who had a big opening on his chest, smiled and said, Don't worry, I won't die. Just as he said, Jian Yi saw Jian Wushuang's divine power churning and recovered his open chest, and also the shattered internal organs in an instant. Everything became undamaged again and Jian Wushuang's fighting power stayed at its peak. Hit me again, and this time hit me harder. It'd be best if you could shatter my divine body entirely. Jian Wushuang looked at Jian Yi. Yes. Jian Yi wasn't in doubt anymore. As Jian Yi launched another attack, Jian Wushuang's divine body collapsed and became a cloud of crimson fog. Under such circumstances, an ordinary cultivator would have been dead. But Jian Wushuang, Virum. There was boundless divine power that reorganized. In an instant, Jian Wushuang's figure appeared in the void again. As expected, Jian Wushuang clenched his hands. A perfect chaotic divine body is completely substantiated by divine power. As long as divine power is inexhaustible, no matter how great the damage to the divine body is, it can be recovered. Even if my divine body were to collapse entirely, it could be reorganized and resubstantiate with divine power again. Jian Wushuang was filled with excitement. As long as divine power was inexhaustible, even if the divine body were to collapse entirely, it could be reorganized. What is this? This is immortality. Back then, when Jian Wushuang had been on the third step of inverse cultivation, eternal realm, he had a power that was extremely close to immortality. It was an unprecedented life force. As long as there was flesh, he could recover himself with time. However, as he was on the 7th step, he truly possessed immortality. Immortality allowed him to have no scruples during fierce fights. No matter how badly injured he was, even if his divine body collapsed, he could reorganize it and continue to battle. As long as his divine power was inexhaustible, he wouldn't die. Of course, when his divine body collapsed, it would be a huge expense to his divine power to reorganize it. Jian Wushuang noticed that he had used up almost 1/4 of his divine power whenever he reorganized his divine body. In other words, his divine body could at most be reorganized 4 times during a fight. But even so, he could be recognized as being in defiance of nature. He could reorganize his divine body 4 times. It meant that he had 4 extra lives. He could be killed for 4 times. Just how ridiculous was that? Plus, he was only on the 7th step of inverse cultivation and merely the 1st stage of the 7th step. It equaled Sir God level in almighty rank. Then, he could continue to proceed to the 2nd stage, the 3rd stage. By then, his divine power and divine body would improve further. When he reached the 3rd stage, the final stage of the 7th step, his divine power would be boundless. It would be enough for him to reorganize his divine body a dozen times or more. By then, immune to poison, water and fire, and he's immortal. This is the perfect chaotic divine body. Unrivaled. Unmatched. Jian Wushuang bellowed at the bottom of his heart as his eyes glowed with excitement. Terrifying. Scary. It was absolutely accurate to describe him as unrivaled. Jian Wushuang finally understood how Emperor Bai could be high and mighty. He understood why the great emperors from the Second Era didn't even have the courage to taunt him. He also understood why Emperor Bai wasn't afraid even though he had dealt with Emperor 13 and knew that his opponent might be stronger than himself. Because Emperor Bai had been unrivaled long ago. Emperor Bai was also an inverse cultivator and had already stepped foot on the 7th step of inverse cultivation. Plus, he should be on the ultimate stage of the 7th step. His divine power was boundless and enough for him to collapse 10 times and to remain alive. On top of that, he had extremely strong power. Even though his opponent might be much stronger than him, it was absolutely impossible for his opponent to kill him. Because he was invincible, he was unrivaled. I just stepped foot on the 7th step of inverse cultivation and my divine power could only support me reorganizing my divine body 4 times. I still can't be considered undefeatable. But at least I will be fearless towards the Second Era. Jian Wushuang said in a deep voice. He didn't mention the ancient times or the First Era. Merely in the Second Era itself, he was absolutely unstoppable. Dealing with the great emperors in the Second Era like Red Dragon King, Abysmal Saint Master, Great Emperor Zissou and so on, even if Jian Wushuang couldn't win against them, he didn't have to be fearful of them because even if the great emperors were to join forces to kill him, it would still be difficult. Besides, after reaching the 7th step of inverse cultivation, there was a secret skill that Jian Wushuang could perform. The secret skill was naturally the strongest secret skill of body refinery by the ancient tribe, immemorial celestial body. He had obtained the secret skill long ago, but he hadn't had the qualifications to cultivate it. But now, the strongest secret skill of body refinery. Even compared to the secret skills of body refinery from ancient times, immemorial celestial body could be listed in the top 10. Such a secret skill, even if it is just the first volume, it would enable my divine body and divine power to reach a brand new level once I cultivate it. By then, my power will improve tremendously too. Jian Wushuang clenched his hands. However, although he had the qualifications to cultivate the secret skill then, he would need some time to cultivate the first volume successfully. I shall take my time. After all, I fully comprehended the first volume of Immemorial Celestial Body long ago. Even though there are a few procedures that are more difficult, I could definitely cultivate the first volume of the secret skill successfully within a few thousand years. Jian Wushuang smiled. Jian Wushuang understood his constitution of the perfect chaotic divine body and also his current power. He didn't further verify them but exited seclusion. In the lofty hall, Jian Wushuang sat on a throne. Jian Nantian, Wang Yuan, Su Rou and the others gathered by his side. Shuang, judging from your aura, you've broken through again? Jian Nantian looked at Jian Wushuang as his eyes shimmered with joy. I just broke through. Jian Wushuang nodded with a smile. That's great. They were thrilled with excitement. Green Fire World finally has an almighty. Wang Yuan cheered. Although Jian Wushuang was attending garrison personally duty in Green Fire World and he had Jian Yi under him, regardless of if it was Jian Yi or Lord Sound Spirit who had assisted Jian Wushuang, they weren't people from Green Fire World after all. It was only Jian Wushuang who was from Green Fire World. Although Jian Wushuang had great fighting power then, he had yet to reach Almighty Realm. Green Fire World had yet to give birth to an Almighty. Now they finally had. Father, you should be nearing a breakthrough soon, right? I could feel your soul power growing so quickly. I think you should be able to substantiate a substantive soul soon. Jian Wushuang commented. Should be soon. Within 10,000 years. I'm guessing. Jian Nantian replied. Everyone was surprised at having more great news. Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows too. All right, everyone. Tell me what happened during the time when I was cultivating in seclusion. Jian Wushuang asked. Then, everyone immediately reported what had happened in the past 3,000 years briefly. In the past 3,000 years, Green Fire World had faintly settled down. Various forces and experts from Eternal Chaotic World had sent 10 million geniuses to the 30% territory. After reproduction for 3,000 years, the number had increased by a dozen times. Just as Jian Wushuang had expected, The people who were born in Green Fire World were much more gifted than those who had been born in other parts of Eternal Chaotic World. Plus, they were getting more and more outstanding through the generations. The 30% territory was given a name of Myriad Noble Region, while the remaining 70% territory was known as Green Fire Region. The two territories were bound by the agreement and they hardly had dealings with one another. They naturally had conflicts. On top of that, cultivators from both parties were growing at a shocking speed. Especially the geniuses. There were too many geniuses across Green Fire World now. It included many who possessed special constitutions. However, because there were too many geniuses, most of them would opt to train themselves in Eternal Chaotic World after they reached Universe God level. On the ancient battlefield, the passion of the experts from Eternal Chaotic World to wander didn't diminish even though 3,000 years had passed. There was a continuous appearance of multiple opportunities. There were many amazing ones too. It even stirred up many battles and countless experts fought over it. However, the occurrence of battles in order to get opportunities and treasures was only right and proper. All in all, it wasn't too drastic of an incident. Everything was calm. Jian Wushuang understood what had happened in the past 3,000 years briefly, and he didn't ask further. He had already passed down the affairs of Green Fire World to his father Jian Nantian, Wang Yuan, Su Rou, and the others. Then Jian Wushuang went to see three other people. They were Hall Master Yuan, Hall Master Gu Xian, and Hall Master Nieyun. The three Hall Masters of Lineage of Star were there in Green Fire World. According to the agreement, besides the 10 Almighties who were in charge of looking after Myriad Noble Region, the other experts from Eternal Chaotic World above Almighty level were prohibited from entering Green Fire World. However, the three Hall Masters were special. That was because the three of them were Jian Wushuang's men. Hence, Jian Wushuang had already sent a message for Wang Yuan to bring the three Hall Masters into Green Fire World when he knew they had arrived. Palace Master, you have finally exited your seclusion. Hall Master Gu Xian was obviously excited to see Jian Wushuang. Palace Master, your aura, did you break through again? Hall Master Yuan's eyes glowed. I did. However, you don't have to announce this. Only the three of you need to know this. Jian Wushuang smiled. That's great. The three Hall Masters were thrilled with joy. They knew that Jian Wushuang could suppress Emperor God when he was at real God level. Then, as he broke through and leaped on the 7th step of inverse cultivation, his power had definitely improved tremendously. They believed that he could compare to a great emperor favorably with his power. Great Emperor. Lineage of Star finally had a great emperor. How could they not be excited? How are our guest elders in Lineage of Star doing? Jian Wushuang asked casually. Guest elders? Hall Master Yuan and the other Hall Masters exchanged a look. Then, Hall Master Yuan answered, the guest elders in Lineage of Star aren't restrained. When they found out about the news regarding the ancient battlefield, many guest elders couldn't hold back. Even though he gave out the command personally to prohibit them from stepping foot in the ancient battlefield, they agreed on the surface. However, many guest elders went over in secret. Only Emperor God Zhouyin, Emperor God Shenwu, and two Sir Gods followed your command. Hee. This is within my expectations. Jian Wushuang smiled. When he gave a command to the guest elders, it was because he knew he might need them. But in actual fact, the danger in Green Fire World didn't need Lineage of Star to get involved at all. Those guest elders who followed my command can enter the ancient battlefield and Green Fire World as they wish. As for those who didn't obey my command, ignore them. The danger in Lineage of Star has been removed long ago. Those guest elders that didn't act according to my instructions will only become our burden if they continue to stay in Lineage of Star. Jian Wushuang said. I understand. I thought the same too. Hall Master Yuan smiled faintly and said, Palace Master, I have an idea. I wonder if I should say this. Tell me? Jian Wushuang said calmly. Green Fire World is Palace Master's hometown, and they follow your lead. Similarly, Lineage of Star views Palace Master as our leader as well. Palace Master, do you think you could get more resources from Green Fire World on behalf of Lineage of Star? Such as moving the old lair of Lineage of Star Universe Galaxy to Green Fire World. Hall Master Yuan asked. Hall Master Gu Xian and Hall Master Nye Yu looked at Jian Wushuang with anticipation. 3,000 years had passed and the unique characteristics of Green Fire World were revealed. Everyone knew that Green Fire World was a true cultivation sanctuary, the cradle of geniuses. Countless experts were dying to cultivate there. However, the territory was only that big and there was a limit to the number of people who could enter to cultivate. Because of Jian Wushuang, many core disciples, including experts from Lineage of Star, could enter Green Fire World directly. However, the freedom to enter and exit wouldn't be as great as moving the old lair of Lineage of Star over directly. Hearing what Hall Master Yuan said, Jian Wushuang was surprised. Actually, after Jian Wushuang had found out how powerful Universe Galaxy was, he had the same idea. However, it was unrealistic back then. Hence, he didn't consider it again. But then, needless for him to say, the three Hall Masters suggested it instead. Jian Wushuang naturally could make it happen. I will immediately make some arrangement for Green Fire World to empty parts of the territory as the old lair of Lineage of Star. However, Universe Galaxy is so huge, it wouldn't be easy if we wanted to move it here, right? Jian Wushuang asked. Palace Master, you don't know that although Universe Galaxy looks huge, it is just a unique treasure after all. Palace Master, you could refine Universe Galaxy and bring it to Green Fire World. Then, expand it gradually. Hall Master Yuan smiled. He was Universe Galaxy's weapon spirit. He naturally knew Universe Galaxy the best. That's great. Hall Master Yuan, you go ahead and make preparations then. When everything is ready, I will return to Starland to move Universe Galaxy over, Jian Wushuang said. Yes. Hall Master Yuan nodded heavily. Then Hall Master Gu Xian and Hall Master Nye Yun left too. As for Hall Master Yuan, his original body had stayed in Universe Galaxy as he couldn't leave. The one that appeared in Green Fire World was merely an incarnation that had formed temporarily. When the discussion ended, Hall Master Yuan's incarnation dispersed. In the void outside Green Fire World, a cold-looking middle-aged man, Emperor God Shiryu, stood and waited in silence. Then, there was an elder in Taoist robe that walked out from Green Fire World. The elder in the Taoist robe was Jian Yi. Shiryu under colored glaze, Great Emperor greets Mr. Jian Yi. Emperor God Shiryu bowed politely. Although Jian Yi was only Jian Wushuang's sword servant, his power was on display. He was a true great emperor. Hence, Emperor God Shiryu, of course, had to treat him with respect. This is what my master told me to deliver, Emperor God Shiryu said as he offered an ancient black tower. The black tower looked ordinary, but it was actually a powerful suppressing treasure. There was a person in the black tower. The person was naturally Sir God Shui Dao. Sir God Shui Dao spread the news in Eternal Chaotic World back then. He was the culprit who had pushed Green Fire World to breaking point. When they had been discussing terms and conditions back then, Jian Wushuang had said that he wanted Sanctuary Alliance to find the person who spread the news and send him over. Sanctuary Alliance naturally did it. Sir God Shui was very cunning and he was well hidden. In front of Sanctuary Alliance, he had nowhere to hide. He was found very quickly and suppressed. Then, Emperor Shiryu sent him over personally after they had found out that Jian Wushuang had exited seclusion. You can leave him here. Then you can leave. Jian Yi glanced at Emperor God Shiryu. Emperor God Shiryu nodded and let Sir God Shui Dao out. After that, he bowed to Jian Yi and in the direction of Green Fire World. Then he left. In the vast void in Green Fire World, Sir God Shui Dao with crimson hair and a crimson robe was tied up. Even his divine power was restrained. He couldn't even use any strength. He looked hopeless then. Virum. There was a figure that slowly appeared before Sir God Shui Dao. You are Emperor God Xie Xian's Jr., Sir God Shui Dao? Jian Wushuang looked cold as he looked down at Sir God Shui Dao. Of course, Jian Wushuang didn't hate Sir God Shui Dao as much as before. Although Sir God Shui Dao framed him and schemed against Green Fire World, he was actually taking revenge for his senior after all. Jian Wushuang. Sir God Shui Dao stared at Jian Wushuang. There was hatred in his eyes, but there was even more helplessness and unwillingness. He was only a Sir God. It was absolutely impossible for him to kill Jian Wushuang. He could only rely on the scheme. He had put in his greatest effort to scheme against Jian Wushuang. He had even led various forces in Eternal Chaotic World to Green Fire World. However, he had never expected that Jian Wushuang would survive even when he fought against the entire Eternal Chaotic World. You and I share no resentment. You were only taking revenge for your senior. You have your reasons to scheme against Green Fire World but I have my reasons to kill your senior Emperor God Xianxia as well. Hence, there is no right or wrong between us, but losers are always in the wrong. Losers are always in the wrong? Sir God Shui Dao trembled, and he couldn't help but lower his head. He lifted his head at the next moment, but then he shouted hysterically, Jian Wushuang, you are great, but don't get too carried away. I am going to die at your hand. But in no time, you will absolutely die at another person's hand. It is only a matter of time. You will have to die. Sir God Shui Dao was frenzied. Jian Wushuang saw and shook his head. There was sympathy in his eyes. Don't worry. I won't torture you. Go in peace. Jian Wushuang said and then pointed casually. There was a ray of light that pierced Sir God Shui Dao's head straight away. Sir God Shui Dao died on the spot. Jian Wushuang's face turned cold at the sight. Maybe you are right. It is only a matter of time until I die by someone else's hand. However, as long as the day has yet to come, I will try my best to improve my power. I will try my best to protect everything around me. Jian Wushuang muttered, and there was determination in his eyes. Just then, Virum! There was a loud whistle from the sword. Jian Wushuang immediately looked at Blood Mountain's sword on his back, and he realized that Blood Mountain's sword was quivering vigorously. Jian Wushuang was connected to Blood Mountain's sword at heart. At that very moment, he could feel how excited Blood Mountain's sword was. It was definitely because something impressive had appeared. What happened? Jian Wushuang creased his eyebrows. Ever since I received Blood Mountain's sword from my master, this is the first time Blood Mountain's sword is acting this excited. It isn't even a fierce fight, but it got excited without showing any sign. If I'm not mistaken, it should have sensed the existence of something. Jian Wushuang thought for a while. Then he took out a token to ask. Very soon, he found out the reason behind it. Earlier, when he killed Sir God Shui Dao, there had been an ancient cave dwelling that had come into the world in the nearby ancient battlefield. In the ancient battlefield, there was a variety of opportunities. There were naturally many cave dwellings that had been left behind by experts from ancient times. In the 3,000 years that Jian Wushuang had cultivated in seclusion, more than a dozen of cave dwellings were discovered in the ancient battlefield. Every time an ancient cave dwelling came into the world, it would stir up a fight among the experts. However, the opportunities in the cave dwellings, some were taken away, but most of them remained in the ancient cave dwellings. It wasn't because the experts from Eternal Chaotic World didn't want the opportunities, but because they couldn't get them. The ancient cave dwellings contained a test. The tests were mostly very strict and no one could pass them. Hence, the opportunities that came along with the tests were naturally untouched. In the ancient cave dwellings that had just come into the world, there were a few experts that had actually gone in by accident previously and obtained some opportunities. However, as the opportunities were taken, the cave dwelling finally came into the world and it stirred up a shocking commotion, especially towards sword principle cultivators. When the ancient cave dwelling came into the world, not only Jian Wushuang, but also all sword experts who were wandering on the ancient battlefield, their divine weapons sensed it and naturally notified their masters. Juju Sword Mansion? The ancient cave dwelling is named as Juju Sword Mansion. Jian Wushuang went through the information that he had just obtained from Sanctuary Alliance. The first batch of experts who found the ancient cave dwelling naturally had a basic understanding of the ancient cave dwelling. They knew the origins of the cave dwelling and they also knew the opportunities within. Juju Sword Mansion contained boundless variations of sword principles. The sword principles were stored on 9 sword steels in a peculiar way. The 9 sword steels contained Juju Sword Mansion's biggest opportunity. However, the 9 sword steels were scattered in 9 corners of Juju Sword Mansion. It wouldn't be that easy to get them. In the beginning, the experts who discovered Juju Sword Mansion had found a sword steel by accident. Hence, it had led to the birth of Juju Sword Mansion. It is obvious that Juju Sword Mansion is aimed at sword cultivators. The 9 sword steels contained a large amount of sword principles. These sword principles are all from ancient times. Jian Wushuang licked his lips and he was obviously tempted. His power had reached such a level. Although he could rely on himself to create a sword-unique skill that was powerful, it was limited. Compared to the shocking sword principle from ancient times, his unique skills were inferior. Hence, if he were to master a few sword principles from ancient times, it would absolutely raise the power of a sword cultivator. Just like the number sword cultivator in the First Era Sword Emperor Dugu. Although he was gifted with sword principle and he had created a sword principle that was suitable for him, his biggest trump card was still King Sword Principle. It was his true power that swept all obstacles away and enabled him to march over the First Era unhindered. King Sword Principle originated from ancient times. Although Jian Wushuang had already mastered the sword principle, it wasn't easy to perform it. On top of that, he had only mastered the first move. So, he could only use it as his trump card. The sword principle from Sword Mansion Juju was different. The 9 sword steels combined large amounts of sword principle from ancient times. Every sword steel contained a large amount of ancient sword principle. To Jian Wushuang, it was extremely attractive. Jian Yi, Jian Wushuang called. Master. Jian Yi's figure appeared next to Jian Wushuang. Have you heard of a sword expert named Juju from ancient times? Jian Wushuang asked. Juju? Sword geek Juju. Jian Yi looked surprised. It seems like you heard of him. Tell me about him. Jian Wushuang was interested. Master, I have heard of Juju. Among solo experts in ancient times, he was considered as a top-grade sword expert. Unless it was necessary, the top forces in ancient times wouldn't offend such an expert casually. Besides, Juju was known as Sword Geek. He truly was geeking out over swords. He was passionate about gathering sword principles and he wasn't interested in ordinary sword principles, only in sword principles that were exquisite and brilliant. For that, he often challenged the sword experts in ancient times. When he challenged them, he liked to bet with rare sword principle books. If his opponents lost, they had to hand him their strongest sword principles. Over the years, he collected many powerful sword principles. That is also the story of how got his name Sword Geek. In ancient times, he might have been the one who was proficient in the most sword principles. Many sword experts who were more powerful than him didn't know as many sword principles as he did. Passionate about gathering exquisite sword principles, and he constantly challenged many sword experts to bet with sword principles. He was truly a sword geek. Jian Wushuang smiled. However, regardless of if it was sword principle, saber skill, or other secret skills, it would be about quality over quantity. Even though he mastered countless sword principles, there were definitely many sword experts who were more powerful than he was. That's true. This sword geek, Juju, was considered a top-grade expert in ancient times. But there was a distance between him and the peak in ancient times. Jenny smiled. However, if he were to be put in this era, Juju would definitely be a high and mighty existence. There were many great emperors in this era that would only be a nuisance in front of him. Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows, but he could understand why. Anyone from ancient times was, of course, not someone anyone in the Second Era could compare to. The sword geek, Juju, was definitely a top-grade expert in ancient times. If he were to be in the current era, he could march over unhindered. Regardless, Juju definitely possessed a bunch of sword principles. To me, they would definitely be useful. It seems that I have to fight for the 9 sword steels too. Jian Wushuang smiled faintly. Jian Wushuang made up his mind and immediately instructed, Jian Yi, you stay back to look after Green Fire World. I will make a trip to Juju Sword Mansion. Master, you don't need me to go with you? Jian Yi asked. There's no need to, Jian Wushuang waved. Ever since he had broken through to the 7th step and possessed the perfect chaotic divine body, he had been different from before. He might have yet to catch up with Jian Yi in terms of power, but in terms of defensive power, even 10 Jian Yis wouldn't be his match. He would be able to deal with everything if he headed over to Juju Sword Mansion alone. If he really couldn't survive when he ran into danger, The outcome would be the same even if Jian Yi helped. Jian Wushuang didn't delay any further but departed. Juju Sword Mansion isn't too far away from Green Fire World. If I rush my journey at my top speed, I will be able to reach it in a few days. I should be able to make it in time. Jian Wushuang was looking forward to it as well. In the ancient battlefield, not only him but also many sword experts who had sensed the birth of Juju Sword Mansion received the news and rushed over simultaneously. There were even experts who didn't have expertise in sword principles that rushed to Juju Sword Mansion. The 9 sword steels might be useless to cultivators who weren't good at sword principle. However, if they could obtain it and sell it, it absolutely could be exchanged for abundant resources. Hence, there were countless experts that swarmed over it like bees, in a barren land with no vigor in sight. Then, there was a tall pavilion towering in the barren land above. The pavilion door was wide open and it was mysterious. Swoosh! Swoosh! There were 2 figures standing side by side outside the pavilion. The 2 Sir Gods appeared and glanced at the pavilion before they entered it. There are another 2 who want it. Including the 2 of them, there are more than 100 experts in Juju Sword Mansion. There are 105 of them. I reckon there are still people who are rushing here. There were 2 purple-robed figures hiding in the void outside the pavilion. They were paying close attention to the pavilion. The 2 of them were assigned to watch the pavilion by Sanctuary Alliance. Not only outside the pavilion, but there were also experts that were assigned to watch from within as well. Sanctuary Alliance would pay close attention to whichever cave dwelling came into the world or any opportunity on the ancient battlefield once it was announced to the public. For instance, Sanctuary Alliance was very concerned about Juju Sword Mansion then. Just then, swoosh, there was a flash of flowing light that burst out of the nearby void. It didn't stop but leaped into the pavilion without any pause. The 2 purple-robed figures stared at the pavilion with their eyes wide open. This speed is so fast. This is too fast. Even an ordinary Emperor God wouldn't be able to achieve such speed. He at least should be a peak Emperor God to travel at such a speed. However, the person who just entered, I didn't see his face but his aura was only of a Sir God? That's weird. Although he was confused, he didn't think much. It looked like it was only a pavilion but it was a mystery inside the pavilion. It was a huge, barren world. The world was so huge that no one could see its border. This is Juju Sword Mansion? Jian Wushuang smiled while he looked around. The biggest opportunity in Juju Sword Mansion is definitely the 9 sword steels. Of course, there are only 8 left. The 8 steels are scattered to 8 different corners. I have to take time to find them. Jian Wushuang muttered and plunged to another direction in the void. He wasn't sure of the structure and environment in Juju Sword Mansion, so he could only wander around. But it was not long after he entered Juju Sword Mansion. Hong! There was a vigorous roar that sounded from the void afar. At the same time, there were ripples of divine power. The loud roar and the ripples of divine power. Jian Wushuang naturally didn't find it foreign. I just entered Juju Sword Mansion for a while. I shouldn't reach the 8 sword steels so soon, right? But the ripples of divine power are obviously from a pitch battle. Jian Wushuang was surprised. He didn't hesitate but plunged in the direction of the source of the divine power ripples. At the end of the direction in which Jian Wushuang plunged, swoosh, swoosh, there were 2 figures, a male and a female, traveling forward at a high speed. The 2 of them looked terrified and judging from their traveling speed, they were running for their lives. Behind the 2 of them, there was a figure that carried an aura that had reached the level of Emperor God who caught up with them. "MOU, I'm sorry that I dragged you down with me," a middle-aged man said as he wielded his sword and carried 2 on his back. It meant that he had carried 3 on his back originally. Now, he was soaring with rage and there was fire burning in his eyes. "You and I are best friends and we are wandering together. We naturally have to go through trials and tribulations together. Why did you apologize? It's just that we never expected that the golden-headed lion would be so persistent." Sir God Mou in a simple gray robe clenched his teeth and spat angrily. "Blame me. I shouldn't have offended the golden-headed lion back then. He is a madman." "A madman?" the middle-aged man carrying 3 swords said. "Forget about that for now. We have to figure out a way to shake off the madman. Otherwise, Sir God Mo was distressed. Although both of them were powerful Sir Gods, the one who was after them was an Emperor God, a mad Emperor God. Just as the two of them were thinking of how to escape, swoosh, there was a figure that suddenly plunged over from afar and appeared in front of them in an instant. Such speed! The middle-aged man who carried 3 swords and Sir God Mo were shocked. Then they subconsciously stopped. They looked at the incomer immediately. Tianjian, it has been a while. Jian Wushuang smiled. Jian Wushuang, the middle-aged man who carried 3 swords on his back, who was the master of Sky Sword Mountain, stared. Sword Emperor? Sir God Mo was shocked too. Just as they recognized Jian Wushuang, they noticed the aura that was given out from Jian Wushuang's body. Sir God? Sir God aura. Almighty! The two of them were surprised. One should know that Jian Wushuang could suppress a peak Emperor God at real God level. Then, as he broke through his power, the master of Sky Sword Mountain and Sir God Mo took a deep breath and immediately became polite. Tianjian, you look like you are being chased? Jian Wushuang asked. He had dealt with the master of Sky Sword Mountain before. Back when he was still a universe god, he had stayed in Sky Sword Prison under the master of Sky Sword Mountain for a few thousand years. It was the master of Sky Sword Mountain himself that had imprisoned Jian Wushuang. However, Jian Wushuang also knew that the master of Sky Sword Mountain had suppressed him because Hall Master Yuan had intentionally instructed him to do so. He naturally couldn't blame it on the master of Sky Sword Mountain. On top of that, Jian Wushuang had improved tremendously in Sky Sword Prison. Later, when Wu Bei's cave came into the world, Jian Wushuang traded 2 white blaze fruit in exchange for Fiery King's freedom. They had had dealings before and they could be considered friends. Yeah, someone is after me, the master of Sky Sword Mountain replied, embarrassed. Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows and looked at the void behind. He had felt a bolt of raging aura rushing over long ago. In the blink of an eye, the figure appeared before Jian Wushuang. The person was wearing a golden top with messy hair. His beard and mustache were all golden, and there was a fire burning in his eyes. The feeling it gave was like a raging beast. Judging from his look, he should be the Golden Lion, right? Jian Wushuang scoffed. Golden Lion was a nickname from experts of the same level. Those cultivators who were weaker would refer to him reverently as Emperor God Golden Lion. Emperor God Golden Lion was mad by nature, and he was quite famous in Eternal Chaotic World. He had only been a top Sir God previously. He had broken through and became an Emperor God when he'd found an opportunity on the ancient battlefield. Many years ago, I had a deep enmity with the Golden Lion. He'll stop at nothing to kill me. He was only a Sir God back then, and I wasn't afraid of him. But now, the master of Sky Sword Mountain smiled bitterly. Then Golden Lion looked over like a beast looking at its prey. His hysterical laughter reverberated in the universe. Tianjian, why aren't you running anymore? Go ahead and run. I'll chase after you no matter how long you run away. No matter where you run to, I will not let you go. Golden Lion, it's my fault that I killed your disciple. But I didn't know his identity then. Plus, I already took the initiative to see you and apologized. Do you have to be so persistent? The master of Sky Sword Mountain roared. Ha ha! That's a joke. You know my temperament. As you have offended me, don't even dream about getting off the hook just like that. Between you and I, there'll be no end to this. Golden Lion roared coldly. You! The master of Sky Sword Mountain was pissed off. Jian Wushuang looked enlightened as he finally understood the ins and outs of the story. He immediately said, Emperor God Golden Lion, Tianjian and I are friends. Plus, he apologized to you about the death of your disciple. You could take advantage of him, but as for killing him, could you please let him off the hook as a courtesy to me? Let him off the hook? Humph? Who are you? I will kill whoever I want. It is none of your business. It's best if you move aside right now. Otherwise, I will kill you both if I am in a bad mood. Same goes to Sir God Mou. Golden Lion roared in anger. The master of Sky Sword Mountain and Sir God Mou heard and they were shocked. Both of them couldn't help but look at Jian Wushuang. Golden Lion, are you courting death? Sir God Mo, you roared from the bottom of his heart. Jian Wushuang's face grew grave, as expected. Humph! A cold thump reverberated in the universe. Jian Wushuang didn't move at all. There was quite a distance between him and Golden Lion. But as he waved, there was a huge hand that appeared in the void near Golden Lion straight away without any warning. The hand contained a terrifying power and instantly froze the space-time around Golden Lion. He couldn't even move an inch in time. Bang! The huge hand slapped Golden Lion brutally and Golden Lion let out a painful groan. He was slammed onto the barren ground and no one knew if he was dead or alive. The Master of Sky Sword Mountain and Sir God Mo, you couldn't help but gulp at the sight. But they weren't surprised. Golden Lion was an emperor god, a top expert. But what was he in front of the legendary Sword Emperor? Sword Emperor challenged the entire eternal chaotic world alone. He had even forced everyone in eternal chaotic world to give in. Although it was mostly because of the grand formation in the spacetime storm, it showed Sword Emperor's capability. Plus, Sword Emperor had already broken through. Forget about an Emperor God who had just broken through not too long ago. Even a peak Emperor God, like Emperor God Tianling and Invincible Emperor God or Underworld God, had to bow down before Sword Emperor. Walala! There was a large number of shattered stones that dispersed and fell into the huge pit on the ground. There was a miserable figure who slowly got to his feet. The figure was naturally Golden Lion. However, Golden Lion had lost his imposing manner earlier. He only looked to be in a fix and a wretched situation. He also looked more fearful. His gaze was fixed upon Jian Wushuang and was filled with terror. He then slowly spoke. You are Sword Emperor? That's me. Jian Wushuang's face was cold. You're really him. Golden Lion's face changed. He was arrogant and obstinate. He was truly a madman and he didn't care about the story of the experts in Eternal Chaotic World. He had heard of Jian Wushuang, but he had never watched any mirror image of him before. Hence, he couldn't recognize Jian Wushuang at first glance. The most crucial part was that Jian Wushuang had broken through and the aura given out was of Sir God level, not real God. Hence, when he saw a Sir God, he naturally didn't associate him with Sword Emperor until he attacked. Then he realized. He understood that he was in big trouble. Big trouble. Emperor God Golden Lion knew how scary Sword Emperor was. He could offend anyone, but he happened to offend Sword Emperor and he just hit it directly in vain. Emperor God Golden Lion felt bitter, but mostly he was glad. He was glad that Sword Emperor held back and didn't kill him directly. Otherwise, Golden Lion, I'm asking you, are you willing to let him off the hook? Jian Wushuang asked with a deep voice and there was chilliness in his eyes. In the beginning he was considered gentle. Who knew Emperor God Golden Lion would behave so recklessly and blindly? Jian Wushuang, of course, wouldn't treat him politely anymore. Yes. Emperor God Golden Lion didn't dare to complain further. Hurry up and get lost. Jian Wushuang roared. Emperor God Golden Lion immediately left and didn't delay any further. Thank you for the help, Sword Emperor. The owner of Sky Sword Mountain immediately bowed to Jian Wushuang. No big deal. You and I are friends. Jian Wushuang waved casually. Oh yeah, you came to Juju Sword Mansion for the 9 sword steals, right? Yes. The owner of Sky Sword Mountain nodded. I originally wanted to try my luck. Who knew there was a test at every sword steal and not just anyone could get it? I was in Juju Sword Mansion for a few days, but I didn't get any sword steal. I met this Golden Lion and nearly lost my life. There's a test at every sword steal? Jian Wushuang was surprised, but it wasn't unexpected. Tianjian, as you have been here in Juju Sword Mansion for quite some time, you should have come across a few sword steals, right? Yeah. I found 3 sword steals in the past few days. But it is a pity that I didn't get any one of them. The owner of Sky Sword Mountain smiled bitterly. Can you bring me to the 3 sword steals then? Jian Wushuang asked. Of course. The owner of Sky Sword Mountain naturally wouldn't refuse. Under the lead of the owner of Sky Sword Mountain, Jian Wushuang immediately went to where the 3 sword steals were located. Jian Wushuang arrived at the first sword steal very quickly. That is the sword steel? Jian Wushuang looked at a green steel towering in the middle of the barren field. The green steel was huge and it was made of unique green crystals. Even though Jian Wushuang was experienced, he couldn't tell what the green crystal was. The green crystal gave out an ancient aura and there was a spiraling tunnel underneath. One could enter the sword steel through the tunnel to sit for the test. At the very moment, there were 3 cultivators by the side of the green sword steel. The 3 cultivators were an emperor god and 2 sir gods. When they saw Jian Wushuang's arrival, their eyes dilated in shock. "Greetings, Sword Emperor. Greetings, Sword Emperor." The 3 of them bowed politely simultaneously. "Come on," Jian Wushuang waved. "There's someone in the sword steel now?" "Yes," the emperor god replied. "Master Wu just went in not too long ago." Master Wu. Jian Wushuang was taken by surprise. In Eternal Chaotic World, before Jian Wushuang rose, before Jian Yi and Lord Sound Spirit and the others appeared, there was only a total of 15 great emperors. 13 of them were from Sanctuary Alliance and there were 2 out of Sanctuary Alliance. It was widely known by the public. In the great Eternal Chaotic World, it was normal that there would be 1 or 2 great emperors that people didn't know. For instance, Master Wu wasn't famous back then until the ancient battlefield appeared. He started wandering on the ancient battlefield and gained fame in the public. He was extremely powerful and was listed at the 8th place on Heaven and Earth Supreme ranking list. Master Wu is good with a sword too. It is very normal that he came to wander in Juju Sword Mansion. Jian Wushuang nodded faintly. Sword Emperor, only 1 person is permitted to enter to sit for the test in the sword steel at one time. As Master Wu is sitting for the test in the sword steel, we can only wait outside, the owner of Sky Sword Mountain explained. All right then. Jian Wushuang smiled but wasn't bothered much. The time flew past. In the blink of an eye, half a day had passed. There was finally movement in the huge sword steel. The sword steel quivered slightly and was suddenly diminished at a terrifyingly fast speed. Looking at the sight, Jian Wushuang and the others immediately understood that Master Wu had definitely passed the test. So, the sword steel belonged to him. We came late. Jian Wushuang let out a sigh, but he couldn't do anything about it either. Master Wu had already taken the sword steel as he had arrived first. It was Master Wu's ability to pass through the test and obtain the sword steel. Hence, Jian Wushuang couldn't do anything about it. As for the owner of Sky Sword Mountain, Sir God Mou and the rest could only be envious. The tall sword steel vanished into thin air and it was replaced by a brawny man who was 3 meters tall. The tall man carried a broad and heavy sword on his back. He himself was just like a mountain and the fierce aura given out by the mountain not only made one feel pressured, but also eerie. The tall, brawny man was Master Wu. Jian Wushuang stood there with his hands on his back when he looked at Master Wu. Master Wu felt Jian Wushuang gaze and he looked back. Both of their eyes met and the void instantly froze. The owner of Sky Sword Mountain, Sir God Mou and the others around them gulped and held their breaths. Master Wu was a great emperor. As for Jian Wushuang, he was also a superb existence. He had obviously already broken through. His fighting power shouldn't be second to great emperors either. In front of the 2 superb existents, they were, of course, nervous. At the same time, they were surprised. Would the 2 of them fight here? Judging from their behavior, they did look like they were going to fight. But in the end, let's go. Jian Wushuang suddenly turned and told the owner of Sky Sword Mountain. The owner of Sky Sword Mountain didn't hesitate and immediately turned to leave. Master Wu reined in his gaze and left as well. There were only the 3 cultivators who were waiting outside the sword steel earlier, left standing at the original spot. Then, the 3 cultivators had yet to calm down. Either Sword Emperor would fight with Master Wu over the sword steel, but it didn't seem like it just now. Humph, Master Wu is a true great emperor, in 8th place on Heaven and Earth Supreme ranking list. But Sword Emperor, although he broke through, I reckon his true power has barely passed the threshold of a great emperor's. His sword servant isn't with him either. What does he have to take things away from Master Wu? That's true. Sword Emperor wouldn't ask for a snub when he knew that he wasn't his match. The 3 of them chatted casually. Juju Sword Mansion in the broad void above. Tianjin, how far away are we from the second sword steel? Jian Wushuang asked. Not too far away. With our traveling speed, we will arrive in half an hour, the owner of Sky Sword Mountain said politely. All right then, let's head over to the second sword steel. Jian Wushuang smiled. The owner of Sky Sword Mountain naturally obeyed. As for the reason why Jian Wushuang didn't fight with Master Wu to get the sword steel, the owner of Sky Sword Mountain didn't ask even though he was curious. Half an hour later, Jian Wushuang arrived at the second sword steel. But Jian Wushuang only saw a barren land when he arrived. He didn't see any sword steel. How could this be? When I left, the second sword steel was still towering here. Why did it disappear? The owner of Sky Sword Mountain creased his eyebrows. It seems like we are late. Jian Wushuang smiled helplessly. Master Wu had taken the first sword steel earlier. Then, someone else had taken the second steel as well. Then, there was only the third one left. Come on. Let's head over to the third sword steel. The three of them continued their journey and they soon arrived at where the third sword steel was located. It was also the last sword steel that the owner of Sky Sword Mountain knew of. He was lucky enough. The sword steel was still towering there. Although there were people trying to pass the test to obtain the sword steel, they failed to do so. Sword Emperor, the person who sat for the test in the sword steel, came out. The owner of Sky Sword Mountain said, Jian Wushuang nodded. He saw a Sir God exited from the space whirlpool of the sword steel and he looked disappointed. He obviously hadn't passed the test. Without hesitation, Jian Wushuang walked towards the sword steel. There were a few cultivators around the sword steel. They were looking at Jian Wushuang as he walked over. Jian Wushuang arrived before the sword steel and prepared to enter the space whirlpool to sit for the test. Just then, swoosh, a figure plunged over from afar. In two simple flashes, he appeared next to Jian Wushuang and before the sword steel. Jian Wushuang creased his eyebrows and looked at the person who came. In a black robe, tall and brawny, carrying a broad and heavy sword. It was Master Wu that Jian Wushuang had seen not too long ago. Such a coincidence. Jian Wushuang smiled faintly. Jian Wushuang already met Master Wu at the first sword steel. However, they didn't have any contact then. Then, as he arrived at the third sword steel, Master Wu rushed over too. The test in this sword steel, I'll take it first. You can wait until I am done before you head out to try. Master Wu said coldly in an indisputable tone. You first? Why? Jian Wushuang couldn't help but scoff at him. The test in the sword steel couldn't be taken by two people at the same time. Only one at a time. Under such circumstances, whoever headed in first would have the absolute opportunity. Because if the first person passed the test, the sword steel would belong to him. What chance would the second person have? Jian Wushuang had no alternative for the first sword steel. But, Master Wu, everything in on the basis of time of arrival, Jian Wushuang said coldly. Time of arrival? I'm sorry, there is no such thing in my head. Speak with power. Get out of my way. Master Wu bellowed and intended to take a stride forward. Just then, there was a sudden gale. Master Wu's face grew grave. He realized that there was a shapeless sword intention that aimed at his skull. He hauled his footsteps. Humph! He humphed coldly and the sword intention instantly collapsed and dispersed. Master Wu's gaze was cold. He looked at Jian Wushuang like an ancient beast. Jian Wushuang, your sword servant is not with you. With you alone, you are not my match. You'd better know where you stand. Otherwise what? Jian Wushuang sneered. Master Wu, you think too highly of yourself. You are courting death. Master Wu was then raging in anger. Hong! There was a boundless sword intention that burst out like a tsunami. The sea of sword intention filled the universe. The entire spacetime instantly froze. Master Wu suddenly drew his sword in the middle of the sword intention. The moment he struck the sword, it was as though the entire universe pressed down on Jian Wushuang. The terrifyingly huge sword shadow extended its length across tens of thousands of miles in the sea of sword intention. Master Wu, who was at the 8th place on Heaven and Earth Supreme ranking list, he either won't attack or he'll attack with full force. The sword principle is pretty imposing. Jian Wushuang smiled faintly, but he didn't panic. The terrifyingly huge shadow that was tens of thousands of miles in length appeared before him, and he pointed with his right index finger. The ancient god's 8th finger, the universe finger. One finger to shake heaven and earth. Rumble. The void gradually collapsed. Under the boundless divine power and power of ancient tribe bloodline, there was a huge finger that looked like it extended from ancient times in the collapsing void. The very next moment, it collided directly with the terrifyingly huge sword shadow. Bang! There was a loud bang and everything in the world faded away. The surrounding void shattered and the entire universe was lifted. Just like the owner of Sky Sword Mountain, Sir God Mou and the others, they scattered around long ago. Luckily, they had retreated earlier, otherwise the repercussions of their collision could easily have wiped them out. Everything had become nothingness. It was only the sword steel left towering there. Although the repercussions of both attacks were fierce, it couldn't damage the sword steel at all. Swoosh! 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 The 5 brilliant golden lights suddenly lit up. The 5 resplendent golden lights were like 5 shooting stars that struck across the void and appeared before Master Wu. Master Wu looked cold as he wielded his broad sword continuously. Every stroke contained hundreds of millions of genes that could easily break mountains and split rivers. Clang! 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 There were 5 continuous clanging noises. All 5 Hong Jun golden swords under Jian Wushuang's manipulation of divine power attacked. Although Master Wu resisted the 5 continuous attacks, he couldn't help but take one step back. Jian Wushuang, I belittled you. I never expected you to be so powerful after breaking through and becoming an almighty. You live up to your reputation as an inverse cultivator. However, you must be dreaming if you want to win victory with power alone. Master Wu's voice was cold. Just as he spoke, he raised the broadsword with both his hands at the same time. Vroom vroom vroom. The terrifying extermination aura instantly concentrated on the broadsword. The surrounding universe drowned in an extermination region. This stroke, Jian Wushuang's expression grew in distress. He could feel that Master Wu's stroke was unusual. It wasn't just how strong the sword intention and sword posture was, but most importantly, the extermination power that it brought about. The extermination power signified that his comprehension of extermination doctrine had already reached the peak in Eternal Chaotic World. He had reached the level 9 standard in Doctrine Palace. The level 9 in Doctrine Palace. The extreme limit of doctrine. All great emperors in Eternal Chaotic World reached that level. It was also an important reason as to why Great Emperor was far greater than Emperor God. For instance, Jian Wushuang's comprehension of doctrine was far behind Master Wu's. Because of the addition of extermination power, Master Wu made the stroke even more powerful. It was so powerful that it shocked Jian Wushuang. However, although Jian Wushuang was shocked, he wasn't fearful. Emperor Sword Principle. V-Room. Jian Wushuang raised Blood Mountain's sword high in the sky. There was a bolt of Emperor manner that swept out. In an instant, Jian Wushuang became an emperor that ruled everything, and he was holding the emperor's sword. As Jian Wushuang wielded the emperor's sword, he immediately displayed a terrifying power. 2 bolts of terrifying sword intention. 2 strokes of sword shadows that could end the world. One was an emperor's sword and the other was an extermination sword. They collided. Virum. The 2 bolts of sword intention hit, and there was no vigorous bang as one might imagine. There were only noises of sword intention and divine power pressing and shattering. Both Jian Wushuang and Master Wu were raging in anger. At the moment when the 2 sword shadows had yet to call victory or defeat, they competed again. Then, both of them fought in close combat and they were meeting force with force. You do not know what death is. How dare you meet force with force? Master Wu raged in anger. He was using a heavy sword. A heavy sword was thick and heavy, and it was best at pressing with power. However, it wasn't good in terms of speed. As Jian Wushuang fought in close combat with him, he would have relied on the flexibility of his sword principle and his speed under normal circumstances. But now, Jian Wushuang opted to meet force with force. without any pattern, competing in terms of strength and also power of sword principle. "Come on!" Master Wu bellowed. "No one is afraid." Jian Wushuang roared too. The two of them fought vigorously in the void. Clang, 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 clang. There was a continuous metal clanging noise that was loud and clear. Every single collision contained boundless divine power. The fight plunged the void into complete chaos. The owner of Sky Sword Mountain, Sir God Mou, and the others were dumbfounded at the sight, especially when they saw Jian Wushuang meeting force with force against Master Wu without having the lower hand. They were astonished at the fact that he didn't lose his imposing manner. One should know that Master Wu had gained fame through victory in fierce fights with his opponents. The reason why he won was not only because of his strength and sword principle that were powerful, but more importantly because his divine power was strong too. The repercussion of the collision was also powerful. After continuous collisions, any great emperor with weaker divine power wouldn't be able to stay standing. However, Master Wu wasn't fearful because his divine power was strong. Even if he were to hit more than 100 times, he would at most have a mild injury. However, although Master Wu's divine power was strong, he didn't know that Jian Wushuang's divine power was even more ridiculously strong than his. He was an inverse cultivator. The 7th step of inverse cultivation gave him a perfect chaotic divine body. His divine body was entirely substantiated with divine power, which was extremely powerful. Maybe, in terms of divine power strength, it might not be able to match Master Wu's. But his defense armor, 5-gem armor, was far stronger than the chaotic divine treasure that Master Wu was wearing. The truly important part was still his constitution. Forget about the fact that it was difficult to damage his divine body when he fought directly with Master Wu. Even if his divine body was injured, he could instantly recover it with divine power. Injury simple didn't exist in inverse cultivator at this step. As long as one's divine power was sufficient, he would never be injured, nor would he die. It was really even more powerful than Master Wu's. As expected, Master Wu and Jian Wushuang already fought forcefully and hit one another over a few hundred times on the battlefield. Every single hit was a full-force hit. The repercussions of the impact caused injury to Master Wu's divine body and his aura grew weaker. But what about Jian Wushuang? He was still billowing with fighting power. His aura was not diminishing but growing stronger instead. The power in his sword didn't diminish either. How is it possible? This guy is powerful, but how could his defense power be this strong too? We hit one another a few hundred times, but his divine body didn't have any injury at all? How could one have such a terrifying divine body? Master Wu was in disbelief. The situation then shocked him. His divine body was damaged and his fighting power was affected. On the other hand, Jian Wushuang became stronger. If they were to persist, there would be no doubt in the result. Jian Wushuang, I shall let you have this sword steel as you are not weak. Master Wu bellowed and seized the chance to leave immediately. Jian Wushuang stood on the spot as he watched Master Wu leave. He didn't intend to chase after him. 8th place on Heaven and Earth Supreme ranking list. Master Wu, he is really powerful, Jian Wushuang complimented in silence. Besides the trump cards like River Mountain Map, Secret Skill of Star Palace, Star Destruction Skill, he used most of his other skills. Even so, he was barely Master Wu's match. In the end, he relied on his advantage in his substitution to meet force with force. Then, he had managed to beat off Master Wu. The fighting power of a great emperor was really unusual. Jian Wushuang could tell that Master Wu had some trump cards that he didn't play. Although I didn't have the upper hand, at least I have a brand new understanding of my power after this fight with Master Wu. With my strength and power that was stronger by one notch than any ordinary great emperor, with all my skills, I should be mid-range among all great emperors on Heaven and Earth Supreme ranking list, but not the ones at the bottom. Jian Wushuang smiled. He had just broken through not too long ago. He merely relied on his transform substitution and his divine power to reach where he was. From then on, he had great space for improvement. Forget about the others in terms of sword principle and comprehension of doctrine. He had great space for improvement. One should know that his comprehension of spacetime doctrine and reincarnation doctrine was only at the standard of level 8 in Doctrine Palace then. When he was fighting against the other great emperors, they were all on the level 9. Jian Wushuang had the lower hand in terms of that. Don't be in a hurry. I just broke through. I have to take my time. First, the 9 sword steals in Juju Sword Mansion are a great opportunity to me. Jian Wushuang lifted the corners of his lip as he fixed his gaze upon the sword steel before him. The fight between Jian Wushuang and Master Wu earlier was extremely ferocious. God knows how many times the surrounding void had collapsed and shattered. The ground was horrible to look at too, as it had become a ruin. However, after such a ferocious fight, the green sword steel was still towering in perfect conditions. Although there were sword lights that hit the sword steel, it wasn't damaged at all. I wonder what material is the sword steel made of. How could it be so tough? Jian Wushuang thought to himself in astonishment while he passed through the spacetime whirlpool and entered the sword steel. In the nearby void, a speeding figure stopped. The figure naturally belonged to Master Wu. Then Master Wu's face grew grave. I never expected Jian Wushuang would be so powerful after breakthrough. In terms of power explosion, he was much stronger than me. His divine power is even scarier, Master Wu muttered. After the earlier battle, he roughly understood Jian Wushuang's power. Although Jian Wushuang had just broken through, he could still be considered as a Sir God. But his fighting power was absolutely not weaker than a great emperor's, and he was not even the ones at the bottom among all great emperors. If it wasn't because his comprehension of doctrines was weaker, Jian Wushuang absolutely could be at the peak among all great emperors. Luckily, although I fought with him, I didn't offend him. Otherwise, when he breaks through again in the future, or when his comprehension towards doctrine heightened, I'll be in big trouble if he remembers me. Inverse cultivators are so scary. Master Wu complimented and continued to leave. It was an empty field inside the sword steel. The test in the sword steel was actually very simple. There was a sword spirit in the sword steel. The person who sits for the test in the sword steel would be fighting against the sword spirit. The sword spirit would maintain its strength at the same level as the cultivator. Then it would call victory or defeat, judging purely by sword principle. As long as one defeated the sword spirit, it meant that he passed the test. The sword principle played by the sword spirit was according to the realm of the cultivator. In terms of the realm, Jian Wushuang was merely a Sir God, which was an early-stage chaotic realm in ancient times. The sword spirit naturally treated him as a cultivator of that level. Although the sword principle it played was meticulous, it could only compare favorably to an emperor god who was good with swords. As for Jian Wushuang, although his understanding of swords was slightly weaker than a great emperor's, he was absolutely at the peak of all emperor gods. He defeated the sword spirit with ease and he naturally passed the test. The moment Jian Wushuang passed the test, he possessed the qualifications to cultivate the sword steel. He spent some time and cultivated the sword steel with ease. On the ruin that was too terrible to look at, the owner of Sky Sword Mountain, Sir God Mou and the rest waited in silence. In no time, Jian Wushuang walked out of the sword steel. When he walked out, the sword steel diminished in size at a terrifyingly fast speed. Then it merged into Jian Wushuang's body. The few of them instantly understood that Jian Wushuang had passed the test. Sword Emperor, congratulations! Congratulations! The owner of Sky Sword Mountain, Sir God Mou and the others came forward to congratulate him, and they behaved politely. Before that, they had already noticed that Jian Wushuang had broken through his realm and guessed that Jian Wushuang already possessed the fighting power of a great emperor. However, it was merely a guess after all, and it had yet to be verified. Even so, they were already very polite to him. But then, they saw that Jian Wushuang and Master Wu had fought before their own eyes. There was naturally no doubt about Jian Wushuang's power. He was absolutely a super expert at the great emperor level. This time, thanks to Tianjian and Mou for bringing me. These Qian Kuan rings are your rewards. There's nothing to do with you next. Goodbye. Jian Wushuang passed a Qian Kuan ring to the owner of Sky Sword Mountain and waved. The owner of Sky Sword Mountain was surprised. He didn't intend to accept it at first. After all, he only guided the way for Jian Wushuang. Plus, Jian Wushuang had saved his life, so he owed Jian Wushuang a favor. However, he didn't reject it when he looked at Jian Wushuang's expression. the owner of Sky Sword Mountain and Sir God Mo, left after that. Jian Wushuang continued his journey in Juju Sword Mansion. On his way, he started fiddling with the sword steel. As expected, the sword steel contains a large number of sword principles, and they are all meticulous and powerful. Their qualities are not found in the ones in this era, Jian Wushuang muttered. He had already cultivated the sword steel, and he could clearly feel the sword principle recorded in the sword steel. Jian Wushuang looked through the sword principles in the sword steel, and there was a total of 136 of them. Any one of the 136 of them could shake the universe if put in the current era. It was enough to make countless sword cultivators go crazy. Regrettably, the 136 sword principles were all incomplete. There was merely a fragment of the sword principle in the sword steel. For instance, there was a sword principle named Brother Peacock. The Brother Peacock sword principle consisted of 6 moves, but the sword steel only had a fragment of the 6 sword moves. There wasn't even one complete sword move. In other words, even if Jian Wushuang obtained the sword steel, he couldn't practice any of those sword principles in the sword steel. He couldn't even cultivate one move. They are all incomplete sword principles. What is Sword Geek Juju trying to do? Jian Wushuang creased his eyebrows. Could the 9 sword steels contain incomplete sword principles each, and only one who could gather all 9 will receive the complete sword principles? Jian Wushuang felt that it was possible. Then, he started sending messages around to inquire. Since Juju Sword Mansion had come into the world, there were more than 5 sword steels that were taken away. If the sword steels were similar to the one Jian Wushuang had, they only contained fragments of multiple sword principles. The few experts who obtained the sword steel shouldn't be calm. The truth was as such too. When the few experts who had obtained sword steels with sweat and tears realized that the sword steels only contained incomplete sword principles and not even a complete sword move, they couldn't calm themselves down and looked around and asked the others who had obtained the other sword steels. In the end, they came to a conclusion. The sword principles in the sword steels did require combining a few steels together for a complete version. However, there was no need to collect all 9 of them. Under normal circumstances, a sword principle would only be split into 2 or 3 sword steels. Only when they obtained the 2 or 3 sword steels that recorded the sword principle would they be able to cultivate the sword principle. In other words, it was useless to get only 1 sword steel. It seems that I need to figure out ways to get more sword steels. Jian Wushuang creased his eyebrows. Jian Wushuang continued to wander in Juju Sword Mansion for the rest of the time. The 9 sword steels in Juju Sword Mansion, although there were 5 that were taken, including Jian Wushuang's, there were 4 remaining that were scattered in various corners. The remaining 4 sword steels were found, but because the test was too strict, they were yet to be claimed by anyone. Jian Wushuang had already found the locations of the 4 sword steels through Sanctuary Alliance. Now he was looking for them one by one. However, there were too many cultivators that were eyeing the 4 sword steels. There were more than 100 almighties in Juju Sword Mansion who were eyeing the sword steels. There were many among them who were faster than Jian Wushuang. Among the 4 sword steels, there were 3 that had already been claimed by the others when Jian Wushuang rushed over. Only to get the last one did Jian Wushuang manage to get there in time. There was a green sword steel that was towering there. Among the 9 sword steels, it was the last sword steel with no owner. Before the sword steel, there were many experts. They came for the sword steel, but they couldn't pass the test. Hence, the experts could only watch even though they knew the sword steel was valuable. Swoosh! Jian Wushuang's body suddenly appeared before the sword steel. The surrounding people immediately looked at Jian Wushuang. It is Sword Emperor. He is finally here. The test in this sword steel none of us could pass. Even Master Wu, who was powerful, tried it and failed. In Juju Sword Mansion now, the only one who could possibly pass the test should be Sword Emperor. If nothing unexpected happens, Sword Emperor definitely can pass this test. The experts at the scene were extremely confident in Jian Wushuang. They went to try the test in the sword steel, and they knew the test content of the sword steel. Because they knew about the test content, they were certain that only Jian Wushuang can pass the test out of all the cultivators in Juju Sword Mansion. Jian Wushuang didn't delay any further and stepped foot into the sword steel before everyone. He appeared in an empty land again, and Jian Wushuang was facing a sword spirit again. However, the sword spirit seemed to be different from the sword spirit in the other sword steel. Previously, the sword spirit was purely testing the sword principle, and it would perform a different level of sword principle according to the cultivator's realm. The sword spirit in this sword steel would still perform according to the cultivator's realm, but the cultivator was supposed to take up a skip stage challenge. For instance, Jian Wushuang was a Sir God, but the fighting power that the sword spirit displayed was the level of an Emperor God. Skip stage challenge. In other words, a Sir God had to defeat an Emperor God in order to pass the test. An Emperor God had to defeat a Great Emperor directly. Great Emperor was a Great Emperor, so who knew how powerful the sword spirit that he fought against would be. However, the skip stage challenge might be nothing in ancient times, but in the Second Era, it was difficult for one at the almighty level to take up the skip stage challenge. It was almost impossible. For instance, Underworld God, who was widely acknowledged as the number Emperor God, could barely fight with an ordinary Great Emperor. In such a situation, there was naturally no one among the Almighties in Juju Sword Mansion who could pass the test. However, the test that they couldn't pass was too easy for Jian Wushuang. Skip stage challenge? For me to defeat an Emperor God. Jian Wushuang chuckled. The sword spirit only recognized realms but didn't know the scariness of Jian Wushuang as an inverse cultivator. Hence, the sword spirit only revealed the fighting power of an ordinary Emperor God. Jian Wushuang could easily kill an ordinary Emperor God before the breakthrough, let alone now. In an instant, the sword spirit was defeated by Jian Wushuang, and the last sword steel fell into Jian Wushuang's hand as he wanted. Then Jian Wushuang had 2 sword steels in his hands. 2 sword steels. I hope there will be a complete sword principle. Jian Wushuang was looking forward to it. He started inspecting the new sword steel carefully. After reading through, Jian Wushuang was disappointed. Or it should be said that he was too unlucky. Then, the sword steels that he had gotten then were vastly different from the sword steel that he obtained earlier. Previously, the sword steel had contained 136 sword principles. But now, the new one only contained 108. Most importantly, among the 108 sword principles, only 12 were associated with the 136 sword principles. To make it worse, the associated 12 sword principles were still incomplete. In other words, the 12 sword principles still required another sword steel. He just left behind some sword principles. Does Juju have to make it this troublesome? Jian Wushuang was distressed. A total of 9 sword steels, he got 2 steels alone, which are considered the best. However, even though he got 2 at the same time, he still couldn't cultivate any one of the sword principles or even one move. Juju scattered the ancient sword principle so complicatedly onto the 9 sword steels. If I were to be unlucky, even if I got 4 or 5 sword steels, I still might not be able to get a complete ancient sword principle. Let alone in the current situation where I just got myself 2 sword steels. Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes. He was sure that even if he relied on his power to grab the sword steels from the others, he might be able to get a sword principle that he was happy with. Even so, there was only one route in front of him. Among the 12 sword principles that are more complete, I shall pick 1 or 2 that are most suitable for myself. Then, I shall ask the experts who got a sword steel one by one. After that, we will negotiate an exchange and I can get the sword steel from them. Jian Wushuang thought to himself. In the beginning, he was thinking of getting a large number of ancient sword principles from the 9 sword steels. At least 10 to 20 of them, but then, he couldn't even dream of getting 10 ancient sword principles. He would be satisfied if he could get 1 or 2 complete ancient sword principles. Jian Wushuang immediately started to choose among the 12 sword principles that were closer to completion. Every one of the 12 sword principles was powerful and meticulous. Even though the 12 sword principles were incomplete, Jian Wushuang still knows some simple information. 9th heaven stroke, 9 sword move, 1 move to the 1st heaven. Jian Wushuang looked through the information about the 12 sword principles and tried very hard to pick the one that suited him the most. Any one of the 12 sword principles would be a first-rate sword principle in ancient times. It would be even more impressive in the current era. Jian Wushuang looked through it carefully and chose 3 sword principles in the end. The 3 sword principles were more suitable for him. Among the 3 sword principles, Jian Wushuang was looking forward to getting sword principle Shen Luo the most. Sword principle Shen Luo was created by a sword expert in ancient times named Shen Luo, and he named the sword principle after himself. There was a total of 4 moves in the sword principle, but it wasn't the kind of unique skill whereby the second move would be stronger than the first. It contained 4 sword moves that covered different regions and different natures. There was 1 move in the sword principle that focused on power, 1 focused on speed, 1 focused on defense, and 1 focused on the instant explosion of power and penetrating power. 4 of the moves were using a sword as a basis and comprehension of doctrine as auxiliary. On top of that, regardless of the doctrine that one comprehended, he could still give full play to the 4 moves in the sword principle. Any move from the 4 moves in sword principle would be nothing but the combination of 4 moves could be a perfectly flawless sword principle if played during a fierce fight. Even the sword geek Juju left a message on the sword steel to express his admiration of that particular sword principle. Back then, when Juju fought with the ancient expert Shen Luo, who had created the sword principle, he couldn't find any flaw in his opponent's sword principle. Hence, he couldn't seize any opportunity. In the end, he had relied on his pure divine power to win against his opponent unconvincingly. Among the ancient sword principles contained in the sword steels, sword principle Shen Luo could be considered a high-grade one. Sword principle doesn't need to be brilliant and luxurious, nor does it need so many moves. As long as it is practical, it will do, Jian Wushuang said. In terms of a master stroke, I already have an emperor sword principle. It required time to accumulate power. It purely focused on the power of sword principle that was extremely fierce. During an actual fight, there will be hardly any chance for you to accumulate power, especially if it is a close combat fight. As for sword principle Shen Luo, it includes both attack and defense in one. It is almost flawless. As I could perform it in an instant during close combat, it absolutely could make up the deficiency in my swordsmanship. Jian Wushuang preferred sword principle Shen Luo over the other 2 sword principles. Of course, he had only gotten 2 sword steels and sword principle Shen Luo was still incomplete. These 2 sword steels contained more than half of sword principle Shen Luo. The rest of it should be in another 1 sword steel, Jian Wushuang muttered. But first, he had to find out whose hand the final sword steel that contained the rest of sword principle Shen Luo was in. Jian Wushuang immediately sent out messages to check. With Jian Wushuang's current power and position, it was too easy for him to find out things, especially things about the sword steels. In no time, Jian Wushuang found his answer. A few days later, on a spacious land on the ancient battlefield, Jian Wushuang stood there in silence. In a short while, a poised lady in a purple robe plunged over from afar and stopped before Jian Wushuang. Han Yi greets Sword Emperor. The poised lady in a purple robe bowed politely to Jian Wushuang to show respect. Emperor God Han Yi, there is no need to be so courteous. Jian Wushuang smiled. You should know why I looked for you, right? Sword Emperor is interested in the sword steel in my hand? Emperor God Han Yi lifted his head. Yes, Jian Wushuang nodded. To be exact, I am referring to only sword principle in your sword steel, sword principle Shen Luo. In the sword steel that I have, there is sword principle Shen Luo. However, Emperor God Han Yi hesitated. I want your sword steel and I naturally wouldn't just take it for free. What are your conditions? What resources and treasures do you want? Tell me, Jian Wushuang asked. He had once killed 100 Almighties from Almighty's alliance. On top of that, he had massacred over the years. The number of resources and treasure he had was terrifyingly abundant. Emperor God Han Yi was only an ordinary emperor god. Even if she brought up an exceedingly great request, Jian Wushuang would be able to fulfill it. Let alone the fact that Emperor God Han Yi shouldn't have the guts to be unreasonable. Emperor God Han Yi's expressions changed multiple times, and there was a flash of hesitation before she said solemnly, Sword Emperor, I don't need any resources or treasure. I only need a favor from you. A favor? Jian Wushuang was taken by surprise. Try me. Jian Wushuang wasn't in a hurry. He had his limits. If the favor that Emperor God Han Yi asked for was just a simple matter, he naturally wouldn't refuse her. However, if the favor were to be troublesome or complicated and required some effort to carry out, or even had risk, Jian Wushuang would definitely not agree with it. Although Sword Principal Shen Luo was impressive and Jian Wushuang was looking forward to getting it, it was merely a fraction of the Sword Principle. It wasn't worth Jian Wushuang putting in too much effort to get it. Emperor God Hanyi took a deep breath and lowered her voice. Sword Emperor, do you know that I have an enemy? Enemy? You mean Yen Zun? Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes. After he found out that the sword steel that contained the last bit of Sword Principal Shen Luo was in Emperor God Hanyi's hand, Jian Wushuang did a background check on Emperor God Hanyi. Emperor God Hanyi did have an enemy, and it was the kind that shared profound hatred. The enemy of hers was Yen Zun. Yen Zun, who was last among all great emperors on Heaven and Earth's supreme ranking list. Emperor God Hanyi, you are not thinking to ask me to kill Yen Zun on your behalf, right? Jian Wushuang's gaze became cold. Although Yen Zun was in last place among all great emperors, he was still a great emperor. How powerful must one be to be able to kill a great emperor? On Heaven and Earth's supreme ranking list, besides Emperor Bai, no one else could do that. Even Red Dragon King on the second place, right below Emperor Bai, even if he launched a full-force attack and paid a price, it would still not be definite that he could kill Yen Zun. Unless there were 2 to 3 great emperors joining forces, then there would be a chance. If Jian Wushuang were to join forces with Jian Yi and play some trump cards, they might be able to kill Yen Zun. However, for a fraction of Sword Principle, he had to kill a great emperor? That was impossible. Sword Emperor, you misunderstood me. It is only a sword steel. How can I ask Sword Emperor to kill Yen Zun for me? I only wanted Sword Emperor to teach Yen Zun a lesson. You don't have to kill him, but let him be in a fix and embarrass him. That will do, Emperor God Hanyi said. Just to embarrass him? Jian Wushuang was surprised. It would be simple if he was only required to embarrass him. It seems that your hatred of Yen Zun is unusual. With any slight chance, you'd want to use it against him? Jian Wushuang looked at Emperor God Hanyi curiously. Emperor God Hanyi's eyes were immediately filled with boundless hatred and murderous intention. The bastard Yen Zun killed my husband and my daughter. I am dying to drink his blood and eat his flesh. Emperor God Hanyi sounded extremely cold and brutal. The hatred between her and Yen Zun was too profound. It was a pity that she wasn't powerful enough and she couldn't take revenge. However, with any chance that she got, she would try to fight Yen Zun. Even if it meant only embarrassing Yen Zun, it was enough for her to pay a great price to get it done. That was hatred. I can promise you that I will find Yen Zun and vent your anger on your behalf, Jian Wushuang said. Thank you, Sword Emperor. Emperor God Hanyi was surprised. Wait for me here, Jian Wushuang said. Then, he turned and left to find Yen Zun. There were many regions on the boundless ancient battlefield that had yet to be discovered. In the void above the ancient battlefield where the space gap was at Birum, there were lofty palaces and pavilions towering in the sky that formed rolling buildings. The buildings were built by Sanctuary Alliance on the ancient battlefield. There were countless experts from Sanctuary Alliance that wandered on the ancient battlefield. They needed a place to rest too. Hence, Sanctuary Alliance built a bunch of buildings there. There were many experts in Sanctuary Alliance who would return to the buildings when they were tired from exploring the ancient battlefields. At that very moment, Jian Wushuang arrived before the buildings. Yen Zun. Jian Wushuang's loud and bright voice reverberated across the sky. There were many experts from Sanctuary Alliance in the buildings who heard the voice. Of course, that included Yen Zun. Swoosh! Swoosh! There were 2 figures that plunged out from the buildings in the first instant. Besides Yen Zun, there was another tall and sturdy middle-aged man in golden armor. Oh! Great Emperor Tian Yu is here too? Jian Wushuang glanced at the tall and sturdy middle-aged man in golden armor. In Eternal Chaotic World, there were 13 great emperors from Sanctuary Alliance. Among the 13 great emperors, there were 10 of them who were masters of a sanctuary. Great Emperor Tian Yu was the master of Sky Mountain Sanctuary. His power should be below average standard among all great emperors. Oh, it's Sword Emperor. Both Yen Zun and Great Emperor Tian Yu looked surprised when they saw Jian Wushuang. Both of them also noticed Jian Wushuang's Sir God aura, and they knew that Jian Wushuang had broken through. I wonder why Sword Emperor is looking me for? Yan Zun smiled and asked Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang and he did not share any resentment. Even before Jian Wushuang grew strong, he had never revealed any murderous intention to Jian Wushuang. Hence, he wasn't worried that Jian Wushuang would do anything to him. Jian Wushuang smiled and replied, Yan Zun, as you can see, I just broke through and I have yet to determine my power accurately. Hence, I came to look for Yan Zun to challenge you. Challenge? Yan Zun was shocked. In Eternal Chaotic World, it was normal that cultivators would challenge one another. However, when one's power reached the Great Emperor level, they cared about their position and status. Hence, they wouldn't fight easily. They wouldn't take the initiative to challenge one another if there wasn't a reason behind it as well. However, Jian Wushuang, although Yan Zun was confused, he replied with a smile, If so, let's find an independent space to fight a hearty battle then. Independent space? There's no need to. The ancient battlefield is so huge. We can just fight nearby. Jian Wushuang smiled. Such a joke. He came to find trouble intentionally so that Yan Zun would be embarrassed. If they were to fight in an independent space, there would only be the two of them but no other spectator. Even if Yan Zun were defeated, it wouldn't affect his reputation. Here, Yan Zun creased his eyebrows and he found it weird. Yan Zun, get ready. I am going to fight now. Jian Wushuang flashed a malicious smile and he moved. Swoosh! Jian Wushuang was like a ghost. He disappeared and reappeared before Yan Zun. He already withdrew Blood Mountain sword on his back. Reincarnation sword principle. Buzz! The sword light slashed and it was as though it contained a full reincarnation cycle. Jian Wushuang exploded his divine power and ancient tribe bloodline power to his extreme limit. The stroke was enough to split heaven and earth. What is Jian Wushuang trying to do? He challenged me out of nowhere and he didn't want to go into independent space either. Regardless of what his intention is, as he wants to fight, I will fight a battle with him. He is alone after all. Even if he has already broken through, he is at most one with the fighting power of a great emperor. I can easily deal with him. I will dismiss him after a short fight. Yan Zun was still trying to figure out Jian Wushuang's intention and was in deep thought. When Jian Wushuang appeared before him and slashed, only then he came back to reality. This stroke, Yan Zun's face changed. He flipped his hand and there was a red battle axe. The battle axe contained a fiery flame and he suddenly slammed it down. Hong! That stroke seemed to have the power to burn every living thing in the universe. Although Yan Zun was at the bottom among all great emperors, he was still extraordinarily strong. However, just as the red battle axe collided with Jian Wushuang's Blood Mountain sword, buzz! Yan Zun's divine body shook and his aura churned. Then, the muscles all over his body flew out like he was lobbing a shell. Just as the muscles were shot out, his body continued to boil. His body finally stopped after a while. After he steadied himself, Yan Zun couldn't help but look at his hands. His right hand was numb and it was aching. How is this possible? Yan Zun was astonished. He thought Jian Wushuang would at most have the fighting power of an ordinary great emperor after a breakthrough. Although he was at the bottom of all great emperors, it shouldn't be a problem to deal with Jian Wushuang. But in the end, he was knocked senseless by the stroke that contained terrifying power. The power contained in the stroke was too powerful. From that stroke itself, he could tell that Jian Wushuang was absolutely not weaker than him but even stronger than him. At least, in terms of power and strength, he was far behind Jian Wushuang. Ha! Yan Zun, you and I shall fight a hearty battle today. Jian Wushuang laughed and raged. His body increased in size and there were extra heads and arms popping out of his body. A total of 9 heads and 18 arms. 9 heads and 18 arms. Jian Wushuang had already mastered the secret skill entirely. At the same time, Jian Wushuang took out a token. The token was a mirror token specially to record this battle. Come on! Jian Wushuang came before Yan Zun again. He waved his 18 arms and fought at close quarters with Yan Zun. Wow! 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 There were continuous sword lights that whistled out from Jian Wushuang's 18 arms. Simultaneously, there were 5 Hongjun golden swords that attacked at terrifyingly fast speed. Besides some trump cards, Jian Wushuang gave full play to his fighting power. One should know that Jian Wushuang was Master Wu's match when he fought force with force back then. He had yet to perform 9 head 18 arms then as well. In other words, the fighting power that he revealed was much stronger than when he had fought with Master Wu. It was hard to call a victory or defeat when Master Wu, who was in the 8th place on Heaven and Earth Supreme ranking list, fought with Jian Wushuang, who revealed such power. Let alone Yan Zun, who was at the bottom of all great emperors. Of course, it was unstoppable. Hence, there was no suspense in the battle. Yan Zun was suppressed entirely since the very beginning. In merely a short while, the situation had become a one-sided trampling. Yes, he was ruthlessly trampled on. Jian Wushuang put his full fighting power to play and ruthlessly trampled on Yan Zun. Although Yan Zun was angry and aggrieved, he couldn't find any opportunity to counterattack under Jian Wushuang's Hongjun golden sword and close combat. The vast difference in terms of strength and power suppressed him completely, and he was devastated. Many people saw that battle. The place where they fought was near to the buildings. There were many experts from Sanctuary Alliance who flew above the buildings to watch in the void. Swoosh! A chubby, bald young man stood at the border of the battlefield. These two, Sword Emperor and the other one is Yan Zun. What's going on? Why are the two of them together? The bald young man looked shocked. It seems that Sword Emperor came to visit and said that he wants to challenge Yan Zun. Then this happened. The Sir God next to him explained. Sword Emperor challenged Yan Zun? I have never heard of Yan Zun offending Sword Emperor though. Why did Sword Emperor come to challenge him? How is this a challenge? He is obviously trampling on him. The bald young man exclaimed. Who knows? Anyway, Yan Zun is doomed. The Sir God sighed. The surrounding experts from Sanctuary Alliance were then complimenting and sighing. They first complimented Jian Wushuang's power. They never expected that Jian Wushuang's fighting power would be that strong after the breakthrough. He could suppress Yan Zun with thunderous measures. On the other side, they pitted Yan Zun. Yan Zun looked too pathetic then. Jian Wushuang suppressed him and ruthlessly trampled on him. Even though he was angry, he couldn't do anything about it. At the same time, they were trying to guess what had happened between Yan Zun and Jian Wushuang as well. From their viewpoints, the two of them definitely shared deep enmity and thought it must be that Yan Zun had offended Jian Wushuang somehow or other. Otherwise, Jian Wushuang absolutely wouldn't ruthlessly trample on Yan Zun in front of so many people. It was legit give him tight slaps in public. Sword Emperor, I lost this battle. Hurry up and stop. Yan Zun had admitted defeat long ago. However, Jian Wushuang pretended to not hear. He never stopped his actions but continued to trample on him mercilessly. Yan Zun was furious. At the border of the battlefield, Great Emperor Tianyu was astonished too. He was astonished because of the power that Jian Wushuang displayed. Although Yan Zun is at the bottom in all great emperors, there is no doubt about his power. However, in front of Sword Emperor, he couldn't even counterattack but is suppressed entirely and trampled on mercilessly. Jian Wushuang's power. Great Emperor Tianyu squinted his eyes and understood the power of Jian Wushuang. There's no doubt that Jian Wushuang had the fighting power of a great emperor. Among all great emperors, he wasn't at the bottom but at an average level or even above average. But he had just broken through? The battle between Jian Wushuang and Yan Zun lasted for 15 minutes. In other words, Yan Zun had been trampled on for 15 minutes. Jian Wushuang finally stopped. Swoosh! Yan Zun instantly became a flowing light and burst out. Then, he kept his distance from Jian Wushuang. When he looked at Yan Zun had already lost his composure. His hair was messy and the armor he wore had faint white dots that were left behind by Jian Wushuang. On top of that, he looked extremely pale and there was blood at the corner of his lips. He looked like he was in a fix. Bastard! Yan Zun clenched his fists. His eyes were looking at Jian Wushuang and burning with fire. A great emperor expert was already the top superb existence in eternal chaotic world. When one's power reached such a level, they would care most about their reputation. Then, he was ruthlessly trampled on before everyone by Jian Wushuang, and he was trampled on for so long. His reputation was all gone. Then, there were suspicious gazes around him. There were even people smiling smugly at his failure. He was dying to find a place to hide. He naturally clenched his teeth with hatred of Jian Wushuang, who had caused all of this to happen. Yan Zun, goodbye. Jian Wushuang let out a burst of hearty laughter and then left. The surrounding experts were confused at the sight. From the beginning until the end, Sword Emperor didn't reveal the reason why he had challenged Yan Zun and trampled him so badly. As for the reason he mentioned about verifying his power after his breakthrough, no one believed that. As Jian Wushuang left, no one continued to ask but immediately spread the news. Jian Wushuang had already broken through. He had become an almighty from a real god. After he broke through, he found Yan Zun, who was at the bottom among all great emperors, and challenged him. Then, he had ruthlessly trampled on Yan Zun with thunderous measures. The moment the news spread, all experts in Eternal Chaotic World received the news in an instant. Very soon there was more news. It was about the fight between Jian Wushuang and Master Wu in Juju Sword Mansion. Jian Wushuang and Master Wu had fought face to face. In the end, they were evenly matched. The news once again proved Jian Wushuang's power. In Eternal Chaotic World, there were many experts who were astonished. They knew that Jian Wushuang would definitely improve greatly in power once he had a breakthrough and become an almighty, but they had never expected him to improve so tremendously. He had just broken through and he could be evenly matched with Master Wu and could trample on Yan Zun. The others had already recognized his power. Jian Wushuang could be in the top 10 on Heaven and Earth's Supreme ranking list. In a lofty palace, there was a total of 3 almighties knelt down on the ground in fear. Find out for me. I'd like to know who is the one who is so capable that they could ask Sword Emperor to deal with me on their behalf. You must find out for me. I want to chop him into pieces. Yan Zun then was like a raging beast. His face was red and he was raging in anger. The 3 persons who knelt before him were experts under his command. Yan Zun was certain that he had never offended Jian Wushuang. Even during the time when they were resolving the matter of Greenfire World, he was merely speaking on behalf of Sanctuary Alliance. Couldn't be considered offending Jian Wushuang. He never came into contact with Lineage of Star either. Hence, he was certain that Jian Wushuang didn't come to look for him because of personal resentment. The biggest possibility was that other experts got Jian Wushuang to deal with him using an unknown method. He reckoned that the person only wanted Sword Emperor to trample on him to lose their reputation. Then he was embarrassed. Although it was Jian Wushuang who did it, he could only take it in about it. Because, regardless of Jian Wushuang's power or influence, they were far beyond him. He had great potential too. Hence, Jian Wushuang was not someone he could offend. Hence, he could only vent all his anger on the expert who made Jian Wushuang did that. Yan Zun used all his connections and started investigating. On the other side, Jian Wushuang appeared before Emperor God Han Yi again. Take a look at this mirror token. Jian Wushuang passed Emperor God Han Yi the mirror token. Emperor God Han Yi took it over and looked through it carefully. Then, her eyes were shimmering with joy. After she watched the images in the mirror token, Emperor God Han Yi took a deep breath and bowed politely to Jian Wushuang. Thank you, Sword Emperor. I trampled Yan Zun on your behalf merely because of the sword steel. There is nothing to thank me for, Jian Wushuang said coldly. Emperor God Han Yi nodded and immediately handed the sword steel to Jian Wushuang. Emperor God Han Yi had already refined the sword steel before, which was why Jian Wushuang could refine it again with ease. After refining it, Jian Wushuang started inspecting the sword steel. As expected, there was the last fraction of sword principle Shen Luo in it. With the combination of 3 sword steels, sword principle Shen Luo was then completed. Jian Wushuang was filled with excitement. Emperor God Han Yi, Jian Wushuang looked. Yan Zun could become a great emperor and he isn't stupid. I share no resentment with him, but I found trouble with him today on purpose and trampled on him. He should be able to guess that there was someone who paid a price for me to do so. Hence, if nothing unexpected happens, he will stop at nothing to find out who the person is. And he would find out that it is you very soon. Thank you, Sword Emperor, for your reminder. Emperor God Han Yi nodded. She had made the same speculations, and she had already decided to immediately leave the ancient battlefield. As long as she left the ancient battlefield, even if Yan Zun found out that it was her who had made Jian Wushuang do it, it wouldn't be easy for Yan Zun to find her in the boundless eternal chaotic world. Emperor God Han Yi left while Jian Wushuang returned to Green Fire World. As for if Yan Zun could find Emperor God Han Yi, and if Emperor God Han Yi could survive, Jian Wushuang didn't care. He merely made a deal with Emperor God Han Yi. Then the deal had ended. So, everything that followed had nothing to do with him. In Wushuang City, in the secret room, there were 3 green steels towering there in silence. Jian Wushuang sat before the 3 green steels as he carefully comprehended Sword Principle Shen Luo in the 3 sword steels. Jian Wushuang organized Sword Principle Shen Luo from the 3 sword steels. Very soon, a complete and powerful sword principle took form in Jian Wushuang's head clearly. Let's begin. Jian Wushuang closed his eyes and started comprehending the ancient sword principle Shen Luo with full attention. Time flew past and Jian Wushuang was absorbed in his cultivation. He went out once in between. He left Green Fire World and the battlefield to go to Lineage of Star. He refined Universe Galaxy in Lineage of Star and moved it to Green Fire World. From then on, Lineage of Star's old lair was set up within Green Fire World. Then Jian Wushuang continued to cultivate in seclusion. In the blink of an eye, 1,800 years had passed as he cultivated in seclusion. In the 1,800 years, both the surrounding ancient battlefield and Green Fire World were peaceful. The growing speed of Green Fire World was terrifyingly fast. There were more and more geniuses that came into the world, and they started to come to prominence in Eternal Chaotic World. However, such tranquility was merely on the surface. In the darkness, the waves of chaos were surging. In the darkest place in Eternal Chaotic World, Gurgle, there was dark river water that covered the entire universe. The river was just like Acheron. The black river water was like water in Acheron. There was where the old lair of Acheron Palace was located. Right in the middle of the boundless Acheron water, there was a pitch-black pavilion that towered over the floating island. In the pavilion, it was dark. In the darkness, there were figures kneeling in reverence. In one glance, there should be more than dozens of them. All of them were in black robes, and the aura that they gave out was powerful. They were all almighties above Sir God level. In front of the figures in black, there was a huge bronze sculpture. The bronze sculpture was about 1,000 zhang tall. It had a monster mask on and it had 8 hands. Each of the hands were holding different weapons. At that very moment, the bronze sculpture was quivering vigorously. The 1,000 zhang tall body quivered and it shook the mountains and earth. The huge pavilion trembled in the balance too. The figures in black who knelt before the figure lowered their heads further when they noticed the sight. All of them were so nervous that they were holding their breaths. Along with the quiver, the bronze sculpture slowly diminished in size. In a short while, the tall bronze sculpture became a 2-meter-tall brawny man who was in bronze-colored skin. The brawny man was muscular. He had a beard and his hair was messy. His body had a faint foul smell, just like he was a living savage. The moment the savage man appeared, the figures in black who were kneeling down shivered in fear. At the very next moment, everyone got up and cheered. "Welcome, Demon King. Demon power is here. Welcome, Demon King. Demon power is here." Their chants continuously reverberated in the dark pavilion.